Headlights, a concrete bridge pier, a crash, and then an icy chill and the trembling hands of a stranger's child waving before his face. The subway engineer woke up in the body of a forgotten prince, whom his brothers had hidden away like a broken object and sent to rot on the edge of the empire. They had chosen for him the deadest place in the world. They didn't know they'd given him a gold mine. Daniel Hyun had spent 20 years breaking stone and concrete. His palms remembered the calluses on every finger. And now he brings his thin, white hands to his face, veins blue beneath the skin, and doesn't recognize them. A rush hits his head. 17 years of someone else's life pour into him like icy water into a crack in the rock. His mother, a third-rank concubine, died in childbirth. Her name is never spoken in the palace. A childhood in a windowless room. Servants run away every month. No one wants to serve a useless prince. 3 older brothers. The first, Reinhold, walked past the child in the hallway as if past a wall. The second, Cassian, ruffled his hair, and with a warm smile, advised him to go out more, but his eyes were empty. The third, Vernon, simply beat him. Not hard, just enough for Dane to remember his place. Then they took him away, hid him in a distant estate under the guise of treating a disease that doesn't exist. And here's the carriage, a thin blanket, a sack of grain under the bench, and a decree with a seal. Prince Dane's inheritance is a bleak one. The gray wasteland, 700 square miles, the eastern edge of the empire. The carriage comes to a stop. A gray-haired old man flings open the door and announces that His Highness has arrived. Dane dangles his legs off the bench, his knees buckle. The old man silently takes him by the elbow. He steps outside and freezes. Stone. Stone in every direction. Gray, flat, cracked. Not a tree, not a bush, not a blade of grass. The horizon is a line without a single landmark. The wind blows in his face. Behind him, a huddle of people huddles together. 13 servants, half of them look like they were picked up along the road. Empty eyes, worn jackets, one coughs incessantly. 10 soldiers. One is missing 3 fingers. Another stands crookedly. His leg has fused together wrong. A third is drunk at 10 in the morning. This isn't a guard, it's a mockery. Here your lot. Here are your people. Die. And right here the engineer truly wakes up. He bends down and picks up a shard from the ground, twirls it between his fingers, squeezes it. The stone crumbles reluctantly, porous but dense, limestone, shelf sedimentary. Daniel straightens up and looks at the plain with new eyes. This rock was born at the bottom of the sea. Millions of years ago, water lapped here, and where the ocean was there remain cavities, caverns, underground rivers. And if the rock is so uniform on the surface, it means it's even purer below. It means you can build down there. He brings a fragment to his nose. It smells musty, barely perceptible, but it smells. There is water somewhere beneath their feet. The old man, whom his memory tells him to call Gregor, asks where to pitch the tents. Gregor served his mother, the only one who stayed of his own free will. Dane turns to him and asks where the nearest entrance to the old mines is. Gregor blinks. Then he says there's a gaping chasm 3 miles to the east. The shepherds give him a wide berth. They say a death wind blows from there. The tents are here. A fire made from whatever we have. And in the morning, we'll go to the chasm. The night tears right through the tents. Dane shivers under 2 blankets and can't get warm. Behind the wall, the soldiers are angry. They were sent here to die. The prince won't make it to spring. I'll leave in the morning. Dane listens and doesn't argue. By all the standards of this world, they're right. 24 people on bare rock, winter in a month, no food, no shelter. But Daniel isn't of this world. He closes his eyes and calculates. Limestone porosity up to 20%. Cavities at a depth 30 to 70 meters. Since there's a draft coming from the collapse, the system is through ventilated. Through ventilated means 2 exits. 2 exits means ventilation. Ventilation means we can survive. He falls asleep with numbers in his head. In the morning, Gregor shakes him by the shoulder. 2 soldiers left during the night, taking the blankets in hardtack. 22 remain. Dane gets up. He goes out to the people. In their eyes there is no hope, only a dull expectation that he will say something about honor and duty. He looks each one in the face and says one thing. In 3 days you will have a roof over your heads. Warm, stone, windless. Whoever wants to see it comes with me. Whoever doesn't want to, leave. I won't hold you back. Leave your food and blankets behind. He turns and heads east. Gregor follows without hesitation. A second later, another pair of feet, then another, then another. Dane doesn't look back. His body protests with every step. His joints ache. His breath comes in gasps. But he keeps going. An hour later, ahead of them, a 2-meter-wide crack in the ground, its edges melted by time. Air is flowing from it. Not cold, warm. Dane drops to his knees at the edge, closes his eyes, and inhales. Dampness and minerals. No rot. Pure subterranean pull. He looks down into the darkness. The air is moving. That means there's space down there. A lot of it. He turns to the people. There are 19 of them. 3 didn't go. It's not a curse, nor is it a dead wind, he says. It's a draft. The mine is connected to the surface at 2 points. Warm air rises. Cold air is sucked in. So down below it's dry, warm, and there's plenty of room. He finds the soldier with the crippled leg with his eyes and asks his name. Bert, can you tie knots? Bert nods. 10 years in the Navy. I need a sturdy rope for 2. Bert looks at the shaft, looks at the prince, and for the first time, something other than emptiness flashes in his eyes. 2 hours later, Dane and Gregor descend on ropes. The torch licks the walls for an arm's length. The descent is 12 meters. Dane counts by the knots. His feet touch the floor. He raises the torch and freezes. The ceiling soars up 8 meters. The walls part. The floor is level, almost smooth. Man-made, not nature. People. Someone carved this hall out of the rock, a very long time ago. The air is warm, about 15 degrees. Geothermal heat. At this depth, the rock maintains a constant temperature year-round. Warm in winter, cool in summer. He walks 20 paces. The hall doesn't end. The light doesn't reach the far wall. He looks up. The vault is perfectly parabolic. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. This ceiling will stand for another 1,000 years. Gregor wheezes that it's warm in here. Warm, Dane replies. Dry and huge. We need a second exit. We'll find it, bring in air and light, and then move everything we have down here. Why? Gregor asks. Because this is our home. They send 4 men to look for a second entrance. A crack. A place where steam rises from the ground. On the 3rd day, a soldier named Caleb finds it. A narrow crevice 3 miles to the northeast, overgrown with dry bushes, steam billowing from it. Dane stands over it and smiles. 2 points, 2 trunks. Warm air escapes through the southern opening. Cold air is sucked in through the northern crack. A constant flow, no pumps, no magic, just physics. He sits down and draws lines in the snow with a stick. The first level. Living quarters for 20 people. Widen the southern entrance, build steps. Leave the north entrance alone for now. The water collection point is where condensation runs down the walls. That's where the first water will be. Gregor doesn't understand the lines or the numbers, but he sees the prince's face. And on that face, something he hasn't seen in 17 years of service. Confidence. The quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what to do. On the 5th day, they dig into the southern passage. Everyone is working. Dane, too. He lasts an hour, then his body gives out. He sits down, gasping for breath, and 20 minutes later stands up again. The soldiers watch in silence. There is not yet respect in their eyes, but already surprise. On the 7th day, Dane stands in an underground hall, holding a torch. The passage has been cleared. They can walk upright. The air flows evenly, warm, enveloping them like a blanket. He raises the torch higher, and the light sinks into the darkness, finding no walls. The hall is as vast as a cathedral. Somewhere far away, water drips rhythmically. He closes his eyes, and a word he hasn't spoken in 20 years floats into his mind. Home. He opens his eyes, turns to Gregor and says, "Carry the things, we're moving." The move took the rest of the day. There wasn't much to carry. 2 tents, blankets, a sack of grain, a chest with the prince's clothes, a cooking pot, 3 axes, ropes. All of this was carried down the steps that Dane had ordered cut into the wall of the chasm. The steps were crooked, rough, but they held. Dane stood below and directed the people. The first rule he established: no one walks into the darkness alone, only in pairs, only with a torch, only along marked paths. He drove pegs into the floor every 10 paces and tied strips of cloth from an old tent to them. The white rags looked like teeth in the torchlight, but they worked. No one got lost. No one slept the first night underground. People sat against the walls and listened to the silence. The silence was different, not empty, alive. Water dripped. The stone breathed. Somewhere far away, something hummed on the edge of hearing. A draft in the distant corridors. Dane knew that sound. He'd heard it every day at the subway construction site in Seoul. But for people who'd lived their whole lives under the open sky, it was eerie. One of the servants, a guy in his 20s named Thomas, sat against the wall with his arms wrapped around his knees. He was shaking, not from the cold, from fear. Dine walked over and sat down next to him. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that the rock above them was 12 meters thick, limestone. Strength, 50 megapascals. That meant you could put 500 kilograms on every square centimeter of the ceiling, and it wouldn't crack. Thomas looked at him blankly. Dine thought for a second and said, "This ceiling could hold a herd of cows. 10 herds of cows, one on top of the other. It's been standing for 1,000 years and will stand for just as long." Thomas blinked. Then he smiled faintly. Dine slapped him on the shoulder and stood up. "A small thing, but trust starts with small things." In the morning, Dine began the inspection. He took Gregor and a soldier named Caleb, the very one who had found the second entrance. Caleb turned out to be useful, quiet, attentive. He walked quietly and memorized the route on the first try, a former scout by his mannerisms. They walked through the main hall to the far wall. The hall was 80 paces long and about 40 wide. The ceiling was 8 meters high, a perfect vault. Dane ran his hand along the wall, smooth, polished, tool marks, even, parallel grooves. Whoever built this worked methodically, like in a factory. There were 3 passages in the far wall. The left one led south, the right one north. The middle one sloped downward at an angle. Dane stood before the middle passage and raised his torch. A 10-degree incline. Gentle, convenient for moving cargo. "This isn't a mine. Mines aren't built like this. It's a road, an underground road leading deeper." He didn't go down there just yet. It was too early. First, they needed to settle into what they had. The left passage led them into a system of 6 chambers. Each was the size of a room, 3 by 4 meters. The ceiling was lower, 4 meters. The walls were smooth. In one of the chambers, there was a niche in the wall. Neat, rectangular, a shelf for something. Dane was recording everything in his head. He had no paper or pencil, but he had Daniel's memory, which worked like a drafting program. He saw space in 3 dimensions. He could estimate the volume of a room in a second. He could calculate how many people would fit and how much air they would need. The right passage led to water. They heard it before they saw it. Drops. Not single drops, but a steady stream. A thin trickle of water ran down the wall into a natural hollow in the floor. The hollow was 1/3 full. The water was clear. Dane scooped some up with his hand. He sniffed it, tasted it. Clean, no aftertaste, low mineral content. Groundwater that had passed through meters of limestone. Natural filtration. He could have explained the process, but instead simply said that the water was clean and drinkable. Gregor scooped some up and drank it. Then he looked at Dane and said it was sweet. The water wasn't sweet. It was just that after 3 days on melted snow, any clean water tasted sweet. Dane assigned the rooms. 6 rooms, 19 people. 3 or 4 people per room. He didn't take a separate room for himself. He lay down in the same room as Gregor and Caleb. Gregor tried to object. He said that His Highness deserved a separate room. Dane replied that His Highness deserved not to freeze. 3 people are warmer together. Gregor fell silent. For the first time in 2 days, Caleb smiled slightly. Dane spent the next 3 days doing what Daniel called engineering reconnaissance. He walked every corner of the accessible part of the dungeon. He touched the walls. He tapped the stone. He listened for echoes. He sniffed the air in every passageway. People looked at him as if he were crazy. The prince crouching down, sniffing the floor. The prince licking the wall and nodding thoughtfully. The prince stands in the passageway with his eyes closed and doesn't move for 10 minutes. He didn't explain. Not yet, anyway. But every evening, he gathered everyone in the main hall and told them what he had found. He spoke in simple terms. "The wall here is warm. That means a hot stream runs behind it. We can use that heat. The ceiling here is damp. That means there's an aquifer close above us. We'll dig a test pit and get water. The rock here is softer. This is the easiest place to widen the passage." People listened. Not everyone believed him, but they listened, because every time the prince said something would happen, it did. He said the water was clean. The water turned out to be clean. He said it was warm down there. It was warm down there. He said the steps would hold. The steps held. The little things added up. On the 4th day of their underground life, the first thing happened. Dane found a wall that was warmer than the others, much warmer. His hand could feel the heat even through the stone. He asked 2 soldiers and Caleb to chisel a narrow hole in the wall. They worked with a pickaxe for 3 hours. When they broke through, hot air poured out of the hole. Not scorching, warm, like from a stove that had been stoked long ago. Behind the wall was a cavity, narrow, vertical, a natural crack in the rock through which hot air rose from below. Geothermal convection. Dane widened the opening and directed the flow into the nearest chamber. An hour later, the chamber was as warm as a summer day. Gregor entered the chamber and stopped at the threshold. He stood in silence. Then he turned his back to the others. His shoulders were shaking. Dane looked away and pretended not to notice. The old man was over 60. He had spent 3 nights on bare rock in a thin cloak. Warmth without a fire was a miracle to him. To Dane, it was physics. Hot rock deep underground, convection, natural draft, nothing supernatural. But he didn't say that. Sometimes people need miracles more than explanations. Word of the warm room spread in a minute. All 19 of them crammed in there and stood there warming themselves. Someone laughed. For the first time in a week, Dane stood in the doorway and thought, one warm room for 19 people. Good, but more is needed. The heat needs to be brought into every cell. A system is needed. Pipes, ducts. He began to design it in his head. He needed materials he didn't have. Clay to seal the joints. Thin stone slabs for the air ducts. Tools. Everything they didn't have. Food was running out. A sack of grain, rationed among 19 people, would last 10 days, maybe 12. They ate thin porridge twice a day. Dane ate the same portion as everyone else. Gregor tried again to slip him an extra ladleful. Dane refused. He said that if anyone got more food just because he was a prince, then in a week people would start dividing the food by strength. And in 2 weeks, the strongest would take it all. Equal portions. This wasn't kindness, it was the engineering of survival. Gregor looked at him with that same long gaze. He said nothing. On the 6th day of their underground life, Dane went to the surface. He needed to scout the surroundings. Caleb went with him. They walked north for 2 hours. Rock, rock, rock. Then the rock began to change. Cracks appeared, revealing dark earth, tufts of dry grass, and on the horizon, a thin strip of something green. A village, a small one, 10 yards, on very edge of the wasteland. Dane and Caleb reached it by noon. The village was called Stonewall. The residents were poor, shepherds. They kept goats that managed to find grass among the rocks. The people looked at Dane with suspicion. A skinny, pale boy in an expensive but crumpled coat. Dane asked to speak with the elder. The elder turned out to be a woman, a stern, gaunt woman of about 50. Her name was Martha. She looked down at Dine and asked what he wanted. He told the truth. He needed people who knew the area, guides, and he needed food, anything, he would pay. Martha asked, with what? Dane pulled a silver cloak clasp from his pocket, the only valuable thing he'd found in the prince's chest of clothes. Martha twirled the clasp between her fingers. Then she asked why the prince needed guides in the wastes. There was nothing there. Dine replied that there was, just underground. Martha looked at him closely. For a long time. Then she said she'd send 2 shepherds and sell him a sack of dried goat meat, for the clasp and for a promise. Dine asked what promise. Martha said, if he finds anything worthwhile down there, he mustn't forget that Stonewall was the first to help him. Dine nodded. I promise. They returned with the meat. That evening was the first decent meal in a week. Tough, salty goat meat and porridge. People ate in silence, focused. No one complained. The salty, sinewy meat seemed like the best food in the world. The shepherds arrived the next morning, brothers, Neil and Roy, young, strong. They knew every rock in the area for 20 miles. Dine asked them about the old mines. They exchanged glances. Neil said there were still places. 3 sinkholes to the south, 1 large fault to the west, and 1 more place they avoided, the eastern cliff. There, the rock was cut clean, like with a knife, and steam rose from there in winter. Dine asked them to show him. The next day they went to the eastern cliff. The journey took half a day. Dine walked slowly. His body gave out every hour, but he kept going. The cliff turned out to be something grand. A vertical wall 30 meters high, smooth, too smooth to be a natural formation. At the base of the wall was a horizontal crevice, wide, 1 meter high, 3 meters wide. Warm air was coming out of it, and light, faint, greenish, barely visible. Neil and Roy stopped 20 paces away. They refused to go any further. Neil said that the elders had told stories about this place. They said that something ancient lived here. Dine knelt down in front of the crevice. He peered inside. A long horizontal passage. The walls were smooth, polished, and greenish lines flickered faintly on the walls. Mineral deposits, or something else. He didn't go in. It wasn't time yet, but he remembered the place, and the greenish light, and how the shepherds had frozen in place. On the way back, Caleb walked silently beside him. Then he asked, "What was that?" Dane answered honestly. He didn't know. Not yet, but he would find out. They returned by evening. Dane gathered the people and announced the plan. First, expand the living quarters. Cut ventilation shafts from the hot fissure into every room. Second, deepen the water catchment. Dig a shaft down to the aquifer. Third, clear out the left wing of the dungeon. There must be more chambers there. Fourth, we need a smithy. Without tools, they won't get any further. The people looked at him. The soldier with 3 fingers, Bert, a former sailor. He raised his hand and asked, "What are we supposed to cut with if the pickaxes are dull and there's no blacksmith?" Dane replied, "Is there anyone among us who has worked with metal?" Silence. Then one of the servants stood up, a quiet man in his 40s. He'd been silent all week. His name was Owen. He said that before entering palace service, he'd worked as an apprentice to a village blacksmith. 4 years. Then he'd been taken on as a servant. Dane asked if he could sharpen the pickaxes if there was a bellows. Owen looked at his hands. Then he nodded. Dane said fine. Tomorrow they would build a forge. Hot air from the crack would provide the draft. Stone would serve as the body. They had no coal, but there was dry brush on the surface. It would be enough to start with. Owen blinked. Then he blinked again, and said that it might work. Dane nodded. Of course it would work. This wasn't magic. It's physics. He went to bed that night and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Not because of the cold. The room was warm. Because of his thoughts. 20 years of engineering experience in his head, and hands that can't hold a pickaxe for more than an hour. He knows how to build a city. They built the horn in 2 days. Owen worked silently and intently. He assembled the frame from flat stones that Caleb and Bert had chiseled out of the wall of the side passage. They sealed the joints with clay. Dane had found the clay himself. In one of the far corridors of the left wing, the wall was damp and soft. He poked it with his finger. Reddish clay. Rich. Dense. Perfect for plastering. The draft came from a geothermal fissure through a channel they had cut the day before. Owen looked at the stream of hot air and shook his head. He said he'd never seen a furnace without bellows. Dane replied that bellows weren't needed. The temperature of the stream was around 60 degrees. That wasn't enough for smelting, but sufficient for heating. If they added fuel, the temperature would rise to the required level. Owen looked skeptical. Then he laid out the brushwood in the furnace and held the torch to it. The flame caught instantly. The draft sucked in air with such force that the fire roared. Owen took a step back. Then he returned. He placed his palm on the furnace stone. It was hot. An hour later, the stones glowed dark red. He placed the pickaxe in the fire. When he pulled it out, the metal was soft and malleable. Owen took a hammer and began to strike. The ringing echoed through the corridors, the first sound of work within these walls in 1,000 years. People came to watch. They stood in the passageway and were silent. Owen struck with steady, measured blows. His hands remembered. 4 years as an apprentice had not been in vain. After 2 hours, the pickaxe was sharp. 4 hours later, all 3 pickaxes were sharpened and one had been reshaped. Owen widened the blade and changed the angle. Dane watched. He asked why that angle. Owen explained, "For limestone, you need a blunt angle. If the blade is sharp, it gets stuck." Dane nodded. This man knew stone not from textbooks, but with his hands. That was more valuable than any diploma. They began their first real work the next day. Dane set the task. To widen the catchment area and dig a shaft down to the aquifer. He calculated the spot. Where the ceiling was damp. Where droplets gathered in a straight line along a crack. There should be water right under that line. They drilled by hand. With pickaxes and a chisel that Owen had forged from the shard of an old sword found in one of the chambers. They worked in shifts, 2 hours at a time. Caleb struck first. Bert followed him. Bert worked with one hand. He had 3 fingers on his right hand, but he clamped the chisel between and struck it with the hammer in his left. He didn't complain. Dinah stood nearby and watched the rock. At a depth of 1.5 meters, the stone became softer. At 2 meters, moisture appeared. At 3 meters, they struck the wet layer and water gushed out. Not strongly. A steady stream as thick as a finger, but steady. Diane held out a pot. In 10 minutes, it was filled to the brim. He did the math. About 1 liter a minute, 60 liters an hour, 1,500 a day, more than enough for 19 people. It would even be enough for 40. He straightened up and looked at the people. They stood there watching the water. Ordinary water flowing from a rock, as if they were seeing gold. Diane understood. In this world, clean water was a luxury. In the cities, they drank from wells that stood next to cesspools. In the villages, waste from tanneries was dumped into rivers far upstream. But here, the water had passed through 10 meters of limestone, a natural filter, cleaner than anything they had ever drunk in their lives. He ordered the pit to be lined with stone and a gutter built for drainage. The water would flow through the gutter into a stone basin. They would carve the basin into the floor, the first reservoir. The work went on. Day after day, a rhythm established itself. Waking up with the first torch, porridge, work, break, work, evening porridge, sleep. Dane worked alongside everyone else as long as his body would allow. When he couldn't break stone, he sketched. He drew plans on the walls with charcoal, ventilation diagrams, chamber layouts, future passageways. At first, people didn't pay any attention. Then they began to stop and look. The lines on the walls were strange, precise, symmetrical. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Drawings in this world were rough sketches. A stick in the sand was considered a plan. But Dane drew to scale, with proportions, with symbols that no one understood but that looked like a language. On the 10th day of their underground life, the first stranger arrived, a shepherd from a village north of Stonewall. He'd been walking for 2 days. He'd heard that the younger prince had a roof and water. He asked for work. Dane looked him over. A man of about 35, thin, workman's hands. He asked what he could do. The man said he could lay stone, walls, ovens. He'd been years of experience. Dane didn't smile, but inside, Daniel shouted with joy. A mason. A real mason. He led him inside and showed him the main hall, showed him the walls, showed him the blueprints, and asked, "See that passageway? I need to double its width and reinforce the arch. Can you do it?" The mason's was named Gareth. He looked at the passageway. He looked at the blueprint. Then he said the arch was drawn incorrectly. Dine raised an eyebrow. Gareth pointed. "We need keystone masonry here. Otherwise, when we widen it, the top stone will sag." Dine looked. He thought. Gareth was right. The limestone in this spot was layered, horizontal strata. When the passage is widened, the top layer will lose its support. We need a keystone, a wedge-shaped block in the center of the arch that wedges the entire structure in place. Daniel knew this, but he thought in terms of concrete and rebar. And here there is neither. Here there is stone and hands, and Gareth knew how to work with what was available. Dane corrected the blueprint. He thanked him. Gareth looked at him strangely. Apparently, princes don't usually thank masons. By the end of the second week, there were 24 of them. They came one by one, 2 at a time. The word spread slowly but surely. The prince in the wasteland had heat and water. Not everyone believed it, but those who had nothing to lose came. A former miner from the northern mines, his name was Darren. His lungs were damaged from the dust. He coughed every 3 sentences. But he knew the rock. He knew how to break it. He knew where the rock was weak and where it was strong. Dane made him foreman of the left wing's clearing crew. A woman with 2 children. She was fleeing the war. The first prince's men had burned down her village. Her name was Kira. The children were 6 and 8. Dane gave her the warmest chamber. On the first night, the children didn't want to sleep in the cave. They were afraid. Thomas, the very same guy who had been shaking on the first night, he walked to them and started telling them about a herd of cows on the ceiling. The children laughed. Thomas laughed too. Dane stood in the doorway and listened, and he thought that for the sake of that sound, it was worth breaking stone 12 hours a day. Food remained a problem. The goat meat was gone. There were 5 days' worth of grain left, Dane thought. He needed a commodity, something he could offer the outside world in exchange for food. Stone. He had stone. But who needs stone in a land where everything is already made of stone? No, not stone. Worked stone, he remembered. Tiles. In Seoul, a square meter of handmade stone tile cost half a month's salary. Limestone. It's easy to cut, easy to polish. It's beautiful, gray with white veins, noble. Dane found Owen, asked if he could forge a flat blade, long, thin, for cutting stone. Owen thought about it and said he could try. 2 days later, they had a stone cutter. Rough, but it worked. Dane took a flat piece of limestone and began cutting. An hour's work, a slab as thick as a finger, 20 by 20 centimeters. He sanded it down with the sand that was plentiful on the surface. The result was beautiful. A smooth gray tile with white veins, warm to the touch. Dane looked at it and thought that in the capital, such a tile would cost a lot. A great deal. He sent Caleb to Stonewall with 5 tiles. Caleb returned 2 days later, with a sack of grain, 2 sacks of dried fish, a bundle of dried fish, and news. Martha sent the tiles on, to a merchant passing through. The merchant said that in the cities they pay in silver for such stone, and asked if he could come for a shipment. Dane nodded. Sure, let him come. He gathered the men in the evening. He said they now had a product, stone tiles. It was delicate work. They needed people with strong hands and patience. 3 tiles a day per person, 10 people. 30 tiles a day. A batch ready for sale in a week. Gareth raised his hand. He said he could do more than just make tiles. He could carve a pattern, an ornament, a bas-relief. He's a stonemason. He knows how. Dane looked at him. Then he said, "Show us." Gareth took a piece of stone and in 2 hours carved a flower on it. Delicate, detailed, with petals that looked alive. Everyone fell silent. Gareth stood there, red as a beetroot. He said he used to carve for himself. No one had asked. No one needed them. Dane took the tile with the flower and looked at it for a long time. Then he said that from now on, every 5th tile would be a signature piece, with an ornament, with the craftsman's name, and it would cost 5 times as much. Gareth blinked. Then he turned away. Then he said quietly that he needed a thinner tool. Dane nodded and looked at Owen. Owen was already thinking. It was a moment, small, imperceptible. But Dane felt something shift. Not in the stone, in people. Gareth wasn't just a stonemason who'd been given a job. Gareth was a master craftsman who'd been noticed, who'd been told that his work was worth money, that his name would be on the stone. It was more than just a paycheck. The merchant arrived 8 days later, a short, nimble man named Walter. He arrived in a cart with a guard. He looked at the tiles, rubbed one with his finger, held it up to the light. When he saw the designer tiles with the ornament, he fell silent for a long time. Then he asked how many there might be per month. Dane replied, 200 regular ones, 40 designer ones. For now. More people means more tiles. Walter nodded. He did the math in his head. Then he named a price. Dane didn't know how to haggle. Daniel bought concrete by the ton and knew what a markup. He looked at Walter calmly and said that the price for the designer ones should be 3 times higher. Walter laughed. Then he looked into Dane's eyes and stopped laughing. They settled on double. Walter left with the first batch and promised to return in 2 weeks with provisions. Dane stood at the entrance and watched as the cart drove. Caleb stood beside him. He was silent. Then he said, "You bargain like a merchant, not like a prince." Dane replied that princes who don't know how to bargain don't live long. Caleb smirked. For the first time in 2 weeks, Dane saw something resembling a smile on his face. The days passed. The work didn't stop. The left wing was cleared, 8 more chambers. Dane assigned the new people, a place for everyone, a task for everyone. Darren the miner supervised the clearing. Gareth supervised the tile cutting. Owen forged tools. Bert handled the ropes, the ladders, the crossbeams. His naval skills proved invaluable. No one knew ropes better than a former sailor. Kira, a woman with children. She asked for a job. Dane looked at her and asked if she could cook for 30 people. She replied that before the war she had fed a boarding house of 50. He appointed her head of the kitchen. A month, 30 days underground. Dane stood by the wall and looked at the numbers he wrote down every evening. 26, 29, 33, 38, 41. People were coming, one by one, in pairs, in families. The word spread to the outskirts of the wasteland and beyond. The younger prince has a roof. There's water. There's work. Dane took everyone in. He asked each one their name and what they could do. He wrote it down in charcoal on the wall of a separate corridor that Gregor jokingly called the office. The wall was covered with names, columns, name, skill, assignment, a small database on limestone. Daniel smiled to himself every time he wrote. In Seoul, he kept such tables in Excel. Here, charcoal and stone. But the principle was the same. Structure, record-keeping, control. 41 people and a place for each. There were masons, there were shepherds who had become porters, there were women who knew how to sew, cook, and run a household. There was an old man named Philip who had made candles his whole life and came because there was no one left to sell them to. Dane put him to work making torches. Philip made the best torches Dane had ever seen in this world. An even flame, minimal smoke. They burned for 3 hours instead of 1. He used tallow and thick cloth and some secret involving dried moss that he didn't share with anyone. Dane didn't ask. Every craftsman has his own secret. That's normal. There were other problems. The first and foremost, food. Walter brought provisions every 2 weeks. Grain, beans, dried meat, salt. But for 40 people, that wasn't enough. People ate twice a day. The portions were small. Kira's children were wasting away before his eyes. Dane saw it and took note. He needed another source of food, his own, a steady one, an underground farm. He'd been thinking about it since day one. Plants can grow underground. 3 things were needed: light, water, soil. There was water. Soil could be made from ground stone and organic waste. Light. Now that was a problem. In his past life, he would have used LED lamps. There were none here. Here, there was magic. Lighting stones. Dane knew about them from the prince's memories. Crystals charged by mages. They glowed with an even white light. They were expensive. They were used in palaces and temples. But there was a catch: defective stones. The ones that didn't glow white but had a tint: yellow, reddish, greenish. They were sold for next to nothing or thrown away. No one needs a lamp that glows green. Dane knew something no one else in this world knew. Plants don't need white light. They need the red and blue spectrum. They reflect green. That's why leaves are green. The defective stones with red and blue tints were perfect for plants. He sent Walter with a special order: defective lighting stones, any kind. The more, the better. The price had to be minimal. They were defective, after all. Walter shrugged and left. He returned a week later with a sack of stones, 16 of them. He paid less for them than for a sack of grain. Dane accepted the sack with a look on his face as if he'd been handed the keys to a palace. He spread the stones out on the floor, sorted them by color: 4 red ones, 3 blue ones, 6 green ones, 2 yellow ones, 1 purple one. The red and blue ones, 7 stones, 7 light sources for the plants. The green ones would go toward lighting the corridors, the yellow ones in the living quarters. He set the purple one aside. He didn't know what to do with it yet. Now for the soil. Dane chose a chamber in the left wing, 3 by 5 meters, low ceiling, a warm wall nearby. Perfect. He ordered the limestone to be ground into fine crumbs. Mix it with clay. Add ash from the kitchen hearth. Add the food scraps that Kira had been collecting in a separate pot at his request. People watched this with bewilderment. The prince was mixing stone with slop and ash. The chamber smelled accordingly. But Dane knew what he was doing. Compost. The simplest compost. In the Korean army, he'd been taught survival skills. In Norway, he'd seen farmers grow vegetables in greenhouses at -20 degrees. The principle was the same: light, heat, soil, moisture. He laid the soil mixture into the stone trays that Gareth had carved out. 12 trays, 1 meter long, 30 centimeters wide, 15 centimeters deep. He hung red and blue stones above the trays. The stones gave off a soft, pinkish-purple light. Not pretty, strange, but just right for the leaves. He watered them with water from the pit, and waited. The first seeds were from Walter's supplies: turnips, peas, some local greens resembling lettuce. Dane planted them and checked on them every day. Nothing on the 3rd day, nothing on the 5th. On the 7th day, he saw it. A thin green sprout had broken through the soil in the turnip tray. He knelt in the chamber, lit by the lilac light, and looked at that sprout. And something he hadn't expected welled up inside him. Not joy. Relief. A huge, heavy relief. Because if it hadn't worked, he didn't know what to do next. He called for Gregor. The old man came. He saw the sprout. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked quietly, "How?" Dane answered, "Light, heat, water, soil. Nothing else is needed." Gregor was silent for a moment. Then he said it was impossible. Plants don't grow in stone. They don't grow without the sun. Dane pointed to the sprout. "This one is growing." Gregor shook his head and left. But an hour later, he brought Kira and the children, and a woman named Alice who had arrived 2 weeks ago and had been silent the whole time. Kira looked at the sprouts. There were already 3 of them, green dots in the purple light. She crouched down and touched one with her finger, gently, as if she were afraid it would disappear. Then she looked up at Dane. There was something in her eyes he couldn't read. She asked if there would be tomatoes. Dane blinked. He hadn't been thinking about tomatoes. Turnips and peas are calories, survival. Tomatoes are a luxury. But he looked at Kira and her children, who stood nearby with eyes wide with amazement, and he said, "There will be. I'll find some seeds. There will be tomatoes." Kira nodded. She stood up and went to the kitchen. And Dane knew that from that moment on, she would feed people not just because it was her job, but because she had been promised tomatoes. A small thing, but loyalty is built on small things. The second problem was more serious. People. Not the number, the quality of the relationships. 41 people in a confined space. Former soldiers, former peasants, former city dwellers. different habits, different personalities. Conflicts were inevitable. The first one happened on the 20th day. Two soldiers, the ones who had been with Dane from the start. They got into a fight over a blanket. There weren't enough blankets, and one took someone else's while the other was at work. A fight, not a serious one. They were separated quickly. But Dane saw that it wasn't about the blanket. It was about territory, about the feeling that everything was unstable, and you had to grab what you could while you could. He gathered everyone in the evening. He stood in the center of the hall, and he said a few things. First, everyone gets the same number of blankets and belongings. Whoever takes what belongs to another loses their own for 3 days. Second, every dispute is settled in front of everyone, publicly. No secret grudges or secret revenge. Third, anyone who wants to leave can leave, right now, without consequences. But whoever stays lives by the rules. He fell silent. Silence. Then the soldier who had stolen the blanket stood up. His name was Horst. Burly, sullen, one of those who believe that strength decides everything. He looked down at Dane, a skinny boy in a thin shirt. Horst said he wouldn't listen to a kid, that he was a soldier, not a miner, and that if the prince doesn't like something, let him find himself another bodyguard. The silence grew heavy. Everyone was looking at Dane. Dane was looking at Horst. Inside, Daniel was completely calm. He'd seen people like this on construction sites, foremen who were used to pushing people around. They understand only one thing, not strength, but decisiveness. Dane said, "Fine, you're a soldier. That means you know how to stand guard. Starting tomorrow, you're in charge of security at the upper entrance. Alone. Every night. 6 hours. On the surface. That's your job. You wanted to be a soldier, not a miner. Be a soldier." Horst opened his mouth, closed it. "It's -10 on the surface at night. 6 hours in the cold every night. It's not a punishment. It's a job. The job he himself had chosen." Dine didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten him. He simply took Horst's words and threw them back at him. Horst stood there for 10 seconds. Then he sat down. He didn't say a word. The next morning, he was standing at the entrance, on guard duty, 3 nights in a row. On the 4th, Dane walked up to him and asked if it was cold. Horst grumbled that it was cold. Dane said that tomorrow Owen would finish the iron brazier, a small one, for coals, for the guard. Horst looked at him, for a long time. Then he nodded, and said, "Thank you, Prince." It was the first time Horst had called him Prince without mockery. Dine nodded and left. Little things. It's all about the little things. Not in words, in a brazier that warms your hands on guard duty. The farm was yielding its first results. 3 weeks after planting, the greens were ready to harvest. Not much, a handful of leaves for each person, but fresh, green, alive. Kira added them to the porridge. The porridge became different. Not tastier, just different. People ate and said nothing. Whoever someone ate with, their eyes closed. Fresh greens in winter, underground, in a stony wasteland where nothing grows above. It was impossible, and yet it was. Dane didn't celebrate. He was already calculating. 12 trays, a 3-week ripening cycle for greens, 6 weeks for turnips, 8 for peas. He needed at least 50 trays to feed 40 people. More trays meant more chambers. More chambers meant more work. More work meant more people. A vicious cycle. Or an upward spiral. It depended on which way you looked at it. He stood in the farm chamber in the lilac light and sketched an expanded plan on the wall. 3 chambers, 50 trays. An irrigation system from the main catchment via stone gutters. Circulation of warm air from a geothermal fissure. Ventilation to remove moisture. He was sketching and muttering to himself. Gregor stood in the doorway and watched. Then he said quietly, "You're talking to yourself, Your Highness." Dane turned around, smiled, said it helped him think. Gregor shook his head and said that his mother used to do that too, talk to herself when she sewed. It was the first thing Gregor had ever said about Dane's mother. Dane froze. The prince's memories stirred. Pain. Not his pain. The pain of a boy who had never seen his. Dane swallowed the lump in his throat and asked what else she did. Gregor paused. Then he said she sang, quietly, when she thought no one could hear. Dane nodded, turned away toward the wall, continued drawing. But the lines faltered. He stood there, a stranger in a strange body in a strange world. But the boy's pain over a mother he had never known was real. He carried it inside him, along with load calculations and strength formulas. Two people in one body, an engineer and an orphan. By the end of the first month, Dane had taken stock. 41 people. The first level is settled, 18 cells. The forge is operational. The farm is yielding its first greens. The water supply is stable. Geothermal heating. Tile production is bringing in provisions. The ventilation system runs on natural draft. He stood in the main hall and looked up. The ceiling. Winter arrived on the 40th day, not gradually, all at once. In the morning, Horst came down from his post, pale, not from the cold, from what he had seen. He said the snow had been falling all night and hadn't stopped. The wind was so strong it was impossible to stand. The temperature had dropped so low that a spit would freeze before reaching the ground. Dine went upstairs and looked out. A white wall. Snow was blowing horizontally. The wind howled in the crevices. Visibility was 3 meters. He stood there for a minute and went back down. They wouldn't have lasted even a night on the surface. Down here it was 15 degrees. Quiet, dry, warm. He thought that for the first time in his life, he was glad to be living in a cave. The first 2 weeks of winter were spent working. Dine used the time when going up was impossible to expand the interior space. The second farm, 20 troughs, a third storage chamber, an expansion of the water catchment. Gareth led a crew of 6 who were expanding the left wing. Darren worked on clearing the middle passage, not the one that led down, the other one, the side branch that Dane had discovered a week ago. The branch led to yet another system of chambers, 14 rooms. Some were blocked by fallen blocks, but most were intact. Dine examined each one. In one, he found the remains of something resembling a stone workbench. In another, there were grooves on the floor, parallel, straight, as if something had been moved along rails here. A transport system. Whoever lived here moved cargo, methodically, organizedly. Daniel knew such systems. In mines, they use rail carts, a simple principle. A smooth surface, guides, minimal friction. A load that one person cannot lift, one person rolls easily along the rails. He remembered this, for later. Right now there was more important business. The blizzard above had been going on for 3 weeks. Food was running out. Walter couldn't make the trip in this weather. They had 5 days' worth of supplies left. The farm was yielding greens and the first turnips. But that wasn't enough. People needed calories, grain, meat, fat. Dane called a meeting. Gregor, Caleb, Gareth, Darren, Kira, Owen, Bert, Horst. 8 people. He stood before them and spoke plainly. 5 days' worth of food. If the blizzard doesn't end in 5 days, they'll start starving. Options. First, cut rations in half. Gain 10 days instead of 5. People will weaken, work would slow down, but they would survive. Option 2. Send a group up. Try to reach Stonewall, 3 miles through the blizzard. The risk is enormous, but if they make it, Martha will help. Option 3. Look for food down below. The central passage leads to the second level. If an ancient civilization lived here for a long time, they must have had supplies. Maybe granaries, maybe something else. Silence. Caleb said he'd go up. He'll make it. He's been through worse. Dane looked at him. Caleb wasn't bragging. He spoke calmly, like a man assessing the route rather than trying to impress. Gareth said they could cut back on rations. People would understand. They all understood the situation. Darren coughed. Then he said he'd go down. To the second level. He's a miner. He isn't afraid of the depths, and he's curious. Dane made his decision. All 3 options. Cut back on the rations. Caleb is heading to Stonewall with 1 volunteer. Dane is going down to the second level with Darren and Bert. Triple redundancy. An engineer never relies on a single option. Caleb left at dawn. Thomas went with him, the very same guy who was shaking the first night. He volunteered himself. Dine looked at him. Thomas had changed over the past month. His shoulders were squared. His gaze had become steady. The dungeon that had once terrified him into trembling had become home. And now he was heading into the blizzard so that this home wouldn't go hungry. Dane gave them a rope, to stay connected, to not get lost in the white mist. And Philip's torches, the best ones. They walked into the snow and vanished in 10 seconds. Dane stood at the entrance and listened as the wind swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Then he went downstairs. The central passageway awaited, a downward slope, 10 degrees. The walls were smooth, polished. The floor was even, with the same grooves he'd seen in the side chambers. A rail system. The three of them walked. Dane, Darren, Bert. 3 torches. Silence. Only footsteps and Darren's breathing, hoarse, intermittent. His diseased lungs were making themselves known. Dane suggested he stay behind. Darren looked at him and said nothing. He just kept walking. The passage stretched downward for about 200 meters. Dane counted his steps. With a 10-degree incline, 200 meters of passage meant roughly 35 meters down. In total, they were 47 meters below the surface. The rock pressure was increasing, but the vault here was wider and higher than up above. The builders knew what they were doing. They had compensated for the pressure with the geometry. The parabolic vault transitioned into a pointed one. Daniel assessed it. Expertly. Very well done. The passage ended. They emerged into a hall. Dane raised his torch, and his heart skipped a beat. The hall was enormous. The first hall upstairs seemed like a small room compared to this one. The ceiling receded into the darkness. The torch couldn't reach it. The walls stretched out to the sides for dozens of meters. The floor was paved with slabs, smooth, fitted together with a precision Daniel had only seen in photographs of the Egyptian pyramids. And the air. The air here was different. Warm, almost hot, 25 degrees, humid, and it smelled strange. Not musty, alive, like after the rain. Darren stood nearby, silently turning his head from side to side. Bert clutched the rope with pale fingers. Dane moved forward, slowly, carefully. His footsteps echoed off the walls. After 20 steps, he saw the first ones. Columns, stone columns 6 meters high, standing in even rows, with grooves carved in a spiral. Not decorative, functional. They were water conduits. Water rose up the spiral grooves using capillary action and pressure differences. Whoever built this had solved the same problem as Dine: how to get water upstairs without pumps. Only they had solved to do it more elegantly. Much more elegantly. He touched a column. The stone was warm and slightly damp. The system was working. 1,000 years later, it was still working. Darren walked up to the wall. He ran his hand over it. Then he froze. He called out to Dane, quietly. Dane came over. Darren pointed. Symbols were carved into the wall. Not letters, not drawings. Symbols. Geometric, precise, repeating in a specific sequence. Dine didn't know them. Neither Daniel nor Dine had ever seen anything like it. But he saw a system, a pattern. It was a language, or a formula, or both. He didn't linger by the wall. Time, food, they moved on. The hall branched into 3 passages. Left, middle, right. The same layout as on the first level. Danae chose the left. On the first level, the left led to the living quarters. The builder's logic must be consistent. The left passage led them into a system of chambers, large ones, about 3 times larger than those upstairs. The walls were covered with something. Danae held up his torch. Plaster. A thin layer of something resembling plaster. White, smooth. And there were drawings on the plaster. No, not drawings. Schematics. Blueprints. Dane froze. On the wall was a floor plan of the underground structure. 7 levels, each marked with a symbol. Lines connecting the levels, passages, shafts, ventilation shafts. He stood and looked at the blueprint that was 1,000 years old, and the blueprint was better than his, more detailed, more precise. The person who drew this knew more about underground construction than a graduate of a Korean university with 10 years of experience. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from excitement. He wasn't the first. Someone had done this before him. Someone knew everything he knew and more, and that someone had left the drawings on the walls, like a note, like a textbook, like an invitation. Darren found food, not real food, but close. In one of the chambers stood stone containers, sealed with tight lids. Bert slid the lid off one. Inside was grain, old, dry, almost petrified, but grain. In another container was salt, white, coarse, pure. Salt doesn't spoil. 1,000 years is nothing for salt. Salt was expensive in this world. A sack of salt was worth a sack of silver in the distant provinces. And here stood 15 stone containers. Dane opened them one by one. Salt. More salt. Dried grain. Something resembling petrified beans. And in the last container, seeds. Small. Round. in separate stone cups, sealed with something like wax. Dane took one cup. He opened it. The seeds were dry and hard. He didn't know what they were, but seeds stored in sealed containers at a constant temperature can remain viable for centuries. He had seen this in Norway, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. The same principle: cold, dryness, airtight. Only here, instead of cold, it was warm, a constant 25 degrees, and the dryness was provided by the rock itself. He gathered the seeds carefully, each cup separately. 7 different types. He would see what grew later. Salt. They gathered as much salt as they could carry. 3 bags. Bert carried 2. Darren carried 1. Dane carried the seeds and tried not to fall on the way up. 6 hours had passed by the time they returned to the first level. Gregor was waiting by the passageway. His face was gray with worry. He saw them and exhaled. He saw the sacks and raised an eyebrow questioningly. Dane said one word: salt. Gregor didn't. He opened the sack. He felt it, licked his finger, closed his eyes, then opened them and said that Walter would die of envy. Dane smirked. Walter wouldn't die. Walter would become their best friend, because a sack of salt in the Kyrant Empire isn't just a commodity, it's currency. 2 days later, Caleb returned, with Thomas, both alive, frostbitten, barely able to stand, but alive, and not alone. 5 men from Stonewall had come with them, Neil and Roy, and 3 others. Martha had sent them, with food, with news. A blizzard had blanketed the entire eastern part of the empire. The villages north of the wasteland were buried in snow. People were freezing, starving. Some are already heading south, and some have heard that the younger prince has warmth and bread. Dane stood and listened. Then he asked how many were coming. Neil said he'd seen a group on the horizon. 20 people, maybe 30, with children. Dane looked at Gregor. Gregor looked at him. 41 people. Food is tight. More mouths to feed means hunger for everyone. Logic said one thing: close the entrance, wait out the winter, survive with those who are here. Dane turned toward the passage leading upstairs. He stood there. Then he said, "Open the gates. Let in everyone who comes." Gregor asked what to feed them. Dane replied, "Salt. 3 sacks of salt." He would send Caleb with the salt to the nearest town as soon as the blizzard subsided. 1 sack of salt would be enough to buy grain for 100 people for a month. In the meantime, cut back on the portions, but give to everyone, to each one, every day. Porridge and greens, not much, but every day. Gregor was silent, then he nodded. They arrived by evening, not 20 and not 30, 47 people, frozen, hungry, children in rags, old people barely alive, women with empty eyes. They stood at the entrance and couldn't believe it was warm inside. Dane stood at the entrance and watched them come down, one by one. Gregor and Kira greeted each one. Hot porridge, thin, watery, but hot. People took bowls and couldn't drink. Their hands were shaking. They were burning themselves. They cried. One old man, skinny, with a white beard, he took a bowl and stood there for a long time. Then he looked at Dane and asked in a trembling voice how to pay. Dane looked at him, and inside, Daniel remembered all the old men he had seen in Seoul, on construction sites, in the subway, small, hunchbacked, who collect cardboard and are afraid someone will tell them to get lost. He replied, "Tell me in the spring what you can do. We'll settle it then." The old man blinked, then he bowed his head. Then he began to eat his porridge, slowly. Dane turned away and went downstairs, to the blueprints, to the plans, to the numbers. Work awaited him. 88 people. Winter had only just begun. By nightfall, everyone was inside. Dane walked among them. The upper hall was filled with people. They sat on the floor, lay along the walls. The children slept. The adults looked around with dazed eyes. Warmth, stone, torchlight, water. Dane walked and said nothing, but he saw everyone. A woman with a nursing infant, a boy of about 10 with an eye patch, a man with a missing leg on a crutch, 2 twin sisters huddled together. Each of them was a story. Everyone needs a place, a job, a purpose. He would think about that in the morning. For now, let them sleep in the warmth. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Gregor found him in the office. Dane was standing in front of the wall of names, writing new ones, with charcoal, in small handwriting. Gregor stood beside him in silence. Then he said that people were asking what his name was. Not his title, his name. Dane didn't turn around. He answered, "Dine, just Dine." Gregor paused. Then he said, "They call you something else," among themselves. Dine turned around. "Like what?" Gregor said. "The prince under the mountain." Dine froze. Then he went back to the wall. He continued writing names. "Prince under the mountain. Fine, let it be." If it helps them believe they won't die in the winter, then let it be Prince Under the Mountain. He finished writing the last name, 88. He straightened up, looked at the wall. 88 names, 88 lives. Under the rock, under the snow, under the wind, alive. He extinguished the torch and lay down. There would be a lot of work in the morning. There's always a lot of work in the morning. But now, silence. Warm rock. 88 breaths in the darkness. Home. The morning after the first big night began with a scream. A woman in the upper hall discovered that her bag of belongings was missing. Her only bag. All she had left. She screamed and cried at the same time. The children around her woke up and began to cry as well. Dane came down from the office. 88 people in a confined space. Half of them had arrived yesterday. Strangers to one another. Hungry, frightened. It was inevitable. He found Horst and Caleb, told them to find the bag, quietly, without a sound. Horst nodded. 20 minutes later, the bag was found in a side passageway. A boy of about 17, one of yesterday's, took it at night. Not out of malice, out of fear, a survival instinct. Grab what you can while you can. Dane looked at him, skinny, dirty, eyes haunted. Not a thief, a cornered animal. He didn't punish him, gathered everyone. He stood in the center of the upper hall and repeated the rules, the same ones from a month ago. Equal portions, public disputes, no secret grudges. And he added a new one. Everyone who comes here gets a place to sleep and a place for their things. Separate, marked, his own. No one touches what belongs to another. Whoever breaks this rule will work 3 days at the hardest work. Not banishment, not beatings. Work. Because there are no useless people here. There are only those who haven't found their calling yet. The guy stood in the crowd, staring at the floor. Dane approached him afterward, asked his name. Arik. Asked what he could do. Arik shrugged. Nothing. Dane looked at his hands. Long fingers. Slender. Quick. He asked if he'd ever stolen before. Arik flinched, then nodded. Dane said, "Good. Someone who can steal knows how to be stealthy and fast." He needed a courier, a man who would run between the cells and pass on messages, quickly, quietly, without mistakes. Arik looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he nodded. A week later, he was darting between levels like a lizard. He knew every turn, every passageway. He delivered Dane's orders accurately and quickly. He found his place. The first 3 days after the refugees arrived were chaos. Dane didn't sleep, literally. The Ra was cooking for 88 people in a kitchen designed for 40. Owen was forging new cauldrons. Gareth was expanding the living quarters. Bert was stringing up rope partitions so that every family had at least a semblance of a corner. Dane walked among the people and did what he had done from day one. He asked for names. He asked what they could do. He wrote it down. Among the newcomers was a gem, a carpenter named Heinrich. He'd been building houses for 20 years. His village had been burned down. His hands shook when he talked about it. But when Dane showed him the cells that needed to be fitted with wooden shelves and bunks, his hands stopped shaking. He looked at the walls, he touched the stone, and said he needed wood, any kind, even crooked pieces. Dane nodded and wrote it down. Wood, in a stone wasteland. A problem, but a solvable one. Walter. Among the newcomers was a woman named Ella, a herbalist. She knew plants. She knew roots. She knew which decoction was for a cough, which for a fever, which for a stomach ache. Dane brought her to the farm. She saw the sprouts in the lilac light and sat there for an hour. She felt the leaves. She sniffed the soil. Then she said the soil was acidic. Limestone produces alkali. You need to add something acidic, conifer ash, or peat. Dane listened and nodded. She knew what he didn't. Not engineering, the earth, living earth. He put her in charge of the farm. Ella blinked. Then she straightened up 2 centimeters and went to work. The blizzard stopped on the 4th day. It didn't stop. It subsided. The snow was still falling, but the wind had died down. Dane sent Caleb south with a sack of salt to the nearest trading town, Granholm, a 2-day journey. Caleb took Neil and Horst with him. 3 men, a sack of salt, a list of what was needed. Grain, beans, oil, dried meat, cloth, wood, tools, rope, and lighting stones. Defective ones, as many as they could find. They left. Dane watched them go from the surface. Snow, rock, gray sky, Silence. He stood there thinking about money. In his past life, money was an abstraction, numbers in an account. Here, money is a sack of salt on the back of a man walking through the snow. If Caleb doesn't make it, the money is lost. If Caleb makes it but the prices turn out to be too high, they'll get half of what they need. If Caleb makes it and the prices are reasonable, they'll make it until spring. 3 possibilities. 1 sack of salt. His entire state's economy in a single sack. He went back down and focused on the one thing he could control: work. The farm was expanding. Ella turned out to be not just a herbalist, but a real agronomist. She went through Dane's soil mix and remade it. She added a specific type of ash. Crushed shells she found in one of the lower chambers. Something else from her herbalist's supplies. The result was evident within a week. The sprouts grew stronger, the greens juicier, the turnips formed faster. Dane stood in the farm chamber and looked at the trays. 28 trays now, 3 chambers. Greens, turnips, peas, and in a separate tray, seeds from the stone cups on the second level. Ella had planted 3 seeds of each variety. 7 varieties. 21 sprouts. If they grow. A week passed. Nothing. 10 days. Nothing. Ella didn't give up. She checked every day. On the 12th day, one of the cups sprouted. Thick. Reddish. Unlike anything else. Ella and Dane stood over it and watched in silence. Neither he nor she knew what it was. A plant that hadn't existed in this world for 1,000 years. Or it existed only here, down below. They let it grow. Caleb returned 6 days later, alive, with a cart, with provisions. The sack of salt did in Granholm what Dane had expected. The merchants saw the pure white salt and lost their minds. They hadn't seen salt like this in the Empire for a long time. Southern salt was gray, sea salt, with impurities. But this was like snow. Caleb traded the sack for so much that the cart was loaded to the brim. Grain, beans, oil, smoked fish, 3 barrels, flour, a bundle of dried fruit, cloth, coarse but thick, for blankets and clothing, rope, 100 meters, and most importantly, tools. 2 sets of pickaxes and chisels, a blacksmith's hammer, a real one. Owen took it in his hands and didn't let go for 10 minutes. He just stood there holding it. And luminescent stones, 12 of them, defective ones, red, blue, green, 1 bright orange. Dane looked at it all and did the math. This would last 2 months, maybe 3 if they were careful. And by then the farm would be up to full capacity, if everything went according to plan. He handed out the supplies, a blanket for everyone, cloth for clothes for everyone. Kira received flour and oil and baked bread for the first time in a month. Real bread. The smell wafted through the corridors. People stopped, sniffed the air. Some cried. The smell of bread in an underground city in the middle of winter. Dane didn't cry. Inside, Daniel remembered how his mother used to bake bread in a small apartment in Busan when he was 7. The smell was the same, flour and warmth and home. He took his slice, the same size as everyone else's. He ate it slowly, every bite, and went to work. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm. Wake up, eat, work, eat, sleep. The farm was expanding. Gareth cut out 3 more chambers. Ella planted them. Heinrich, the carpenter, received wood from Caleb's cart. Not much, scraps, warped boards. But to him, it was a treasure. He built bunks for 20 rooms in 10 days. Simple, a frame and boards. But people stopped sleeping on stone. That changed everything. Sleeping on wood and sleeping on stone are 2 different kinds of sleep. People became more alert, stronger, more productive. Dane noticed and took note. Comfort is not a luxury. Comfort is productivity. By the end of the 2nd month, the population had stopped growing. 93 people. The storm had subsided. Those who wanted to reach them had already done so. The rest had gone south or stayed in the villages. 93. The first level was getting cramped. Dane made a decision. It was time to settle into the second. He assembled a crew: Gareth, Darren, Bert, 5 strong men from the new arrivals. Owen stayed upstairs. The forge couldn't sit idle. They descended to the 2nd level. Dane led the way first with a torch. In a month, he'd memorized the passage. 200 meters, a 10-degree incline, a depth of 47 meters. The columned hall greeted them with warmth and silence. Dane showed the crew the chambers, large, spacious. Gareth looked at the walls, at the plaster, at the drawings. He was silent for a long time. Then he said that this place was 1,000 years old and in better condition than his father's house, which was 30. Dane smiled. He said the builders knew their craft. They began clearing the area. The chambers on the second level were almost ready. All that was left was to clear away the dust, break through a few blockages, check the arches. Dane inspected every arch personally. He tapped, he listened, he felt. There were no cracks. The stone was solid, strong, 1,000 years and not a single crack. Daniel the engineer was delighted. Dane the prince was grateful. A week later, the second level welcomed its first residents. 20 people went down, those who weren't afraid of the depths. The chambers were warmer than on the first level, 25 degrees. Some found it hot. Dane smiled. In Seoul, people paid money for that temperature in their apartments. And here it was free. Geothermal energy, a gift from the planet. On the second level, he set up a second forge, closer to the hot streams. The draft temperature here was higher, 80 degrees. Owen came to take a look and said that with such a draft, you could work with real metal, not just sharpened pickaxes. The third month, winter was biting into the wasteland with Nom, but down below, life was finding its rhythm. Dane introduced a schedule, not for control, for order. People who know what tomorrow will bring stop being afraid. The first shift worked on expanding the chambers, the second on the farm, the third on tile production, the fourth on maintenance, cooking, cleaning, water delivery, torch maintenance. Everyone worked 6 hours, no more. Dene remembered the construction sites in Seoul where people worked 12-hour shifts, and he remembered how they broke down. Body, spirit, everything. He wouldn't let that happen here. 6 hours of work, 2 hours for themselves, the rest for sleep. Anyone who wanted to work more could, but no one was required to. The first week, people didn't believe it. They expected a catch. On construction sites and in the mines of this world, people worked until they were exhausted. Anyone who stopped was beaten. Here, they struck stone, not people. A week later, Dane saw the results. People worked better, faster, more precisely. 6 hours of focused labor yielded more than 12 hours of exhaustion. He knew that. But knowing and seeing are two different things. The farm had reached a new level. Ella had grown her first crop of turnips. A real harvest. 60 root vegetables. Small, crooked, but edible. She laid them out on the stone table in the kitchen and stood beside them with a look on her face as if she'd placed gold there. Kira picked up a turnip, turned it over, sniffed it, and began to cut it. That evening, the porridge contained fresh turnips, their own, grown in stone beneath the earth in the middle of winter. People ate in silence. Some squinted, some shook their heads. The old man with the white beard, the very one who had asked how to pay, he ate with his eyes closed, slowly. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Dane, and nodded quietly. Dane nodded back, a conversation without words. A reddish sprout from ancient seeds continued to grow. By the third month, it was 1/2 meter tall, a thick stem, broad leaves, dark green with red veins. Ella didn't know what it was. No one knew. The plant didn't bloom, it didn't bear fruit, it just grew, upward and outward. Dane came to look at it every day. Sometimes it seemed to him that the leaves turned toward him when he entered. But that was, of course, his imagination. Prince Dane's body was changing too. 3 months of physical labor, even if only a little at a time, even if only an hour a day, but every day. His arms had grown stronger, his legs were steadier, his breathing was more even. He was still weak by any laborer's standards, but he could walk 3 miles without getting out of breath. He could hold a pickaxe for 20 minutes. He could climb the stairs without stopping. Gregor noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. Once he said that His Highness had grown taller. Dane measured himself against a mark on the wall. It was true. His body was growing. 17 years old. Of course it was growing. He had forgotten. He'd gotten used to thinking like a 29-year-old. But his body was that of a teenager. Growing. Changing. It needed more food. More protein. This applied not only to him, Kira's children, the boy with the eye patch, Adek. All the teenagers and children needed proper nutrition. Greens and turnips are fine, but they need protein. Meat, fish, eggs, or beans. The peas on the farm were growing, but slowly. Another month until the first harvest. Dane sent Walter for seeds, specifically for lentil seeds. Lentils grow quickly. They're undemanding, rich in protein. The ideal crop for an underground farm. Walter brought the seeds back in 10 days along with another batch of defective stones. 8 of them. Dane was buying them constantly now. Each chamber of the farm required at least 4 stones. And there were more and more chambers. Walter brought something else back. News. The war between the senior princes of the Cold had turned hot. First Prince Reinhold had moved the northern army toward the capital. Third Prince Vernon had intercepted Second Prince Cassian's supply trains on the southern road. Cassian responded by blocking the river routes. Trade in the empire had ground to a halt. Prices had doubled. Famine was setting in, and not just on the outskirts. In the central provinces, people were eating tree bark. Dane listened and calculated. War is bad, but war is an opportunity. When the empire collapses, whoever has food and iron becomes the center of gravity. While the brothers fight, he builds. He thanked Walter and asked if he could find him some tomato seeds. Walter looked surprised. Tomatoes in winter? Dane said not in winter. By spring. He just needed seeds. Any variety. Walter shrugged and jotted it down. Dane thought of Kira. A promise. There would be tomatoes. A promise made to a woman whose village had burned down and whose children were wasting away before her eyes. He would keep that promise. By the middle of the 3rd month, an event occurred that changed everything. She arrived in the evening, alone, on foot, through the snow, with no belongings, just a knapsack on her shoulder and a pickaxe in her hand. Horst was the first to see her from his post up above. A woman of about 24, thin, wiry, short-cropped hair, a weather-beaten face, working hands, rough, with calluses that Dane had never seen on anyone but himself, Daniel, in his past life. Calluses from a pickaxe. She came down, looked around, silently. Her face showed nothing. No surprise, no fear, no relief, just assessment. The gaze of a professional looking at a job. Dane approached, introduced himself, asked her name. Hana Song. Asked where she was from. The Northern Mines. The 12th mine. Dane nodded. He knew about the Northern Mines from the prince's memories. The Empire's largest mines. Iron, copper, coal. Hard, dangerous work. He asked what had happened. Hana answered briefly. Work face number 6. She saw a crack in the ceiling. She told the foreman. The foreman told her to keep digging. She refused. The foreman hit her. She hit him back. She was fired. A week later, pit number 6 collapsed. 12 people died. They blamed her. They said she knew and didn't stop it. 2 years without work, without a home, without a place to stay. She heard that someone was building underground in the wasteland. She came. She spoke dryly, without emotion, like a report. But Dane saw her hands. They were clenched into fists. Her knuckles were white. 2 years of shame and rage in those fists. He didn't say he understood. He didn't try to comfort her. He led her to the wall with the blueprints. He unfolded the plan for the 2nd-level expansion in front of her and said, "Where did I go wrong?" Hana looked at the drawing, silently. 10 seconds. 20. Then she pointed. "Here, the slope angle is wrong. With this humidity, the stone will swell. It will warp the wall." She pointed to another spot. "Here, the passage is too narrow for two-way traffic. If an evacuation is needed, people will get stuck. And here, the span between supports is too wide. With this arch span, intermediate supports or interlocking masonry are needed at least every 3 meters. Dane looked at her. Inside, Daniel was screaming with joy. She sees. She really sees. Not by eye, not by experience, by knowledge. Precise, profound, rare. He nodded, corrected the drawing, thanked her. Hana stood there, blinking. 10 seconds of silence. Then she said quietly, "You're the first one to ask." Dane looked at her. She turned away, quickly, but he saw it. Her eyes flashed. 2 years. For 2 years she had carried within her the knowledge that would save 12 lives, and no one had ever asked. He appointed her foreman of the quarry work. Darren, for whom physical labor was becoming increasingly difficult, gladly stepped aside. He said his job was to strike the stone, not to think about where to strike. Hana picked up a pickaxe, her own, the one she'd come with, and she went to work. From that day on, everything moved faster. Hana worked like a machine, not fast, precise. Every blow in the right spot, every cut at the right angle, every arch with a safety margin. She didn't talk to people more than necessary. Briefly, sharply. Hit here. Don't touch here. Support here. People were a little afraid of her, but they respected her, because not a single arch she designed had cracked. Dane worked side by side with her, not physically. He stood nearby and watched. He asked questions. She answered. Sometimes they argued about loads and angles. quietly, technically, like two engineers at a production meeting. Gregor once caught them arguing about the permissible load on a side arch. They were sketching on the wall at the same time, correcting each other, oblivious to everything around them. Gregor stood there, watched, shook his head and walked away, muttering something about how strange young people are these days. On the 20th day of the third month, Hana called him Master for the first time. Not Prince, not Your Highness. Master. In the northern mines, that word meant more than any title. A master is someone who knows the rock, who sees the stone from the inside, who never makes a mistake. Dane stopped. He looked at her. Hana stared at the drawing without looking up, as if she hadn't said anything special. But the tips of her ears were red. He didn't say anything in reply. He just kept drawing. But the lines on the wall became straighter. By the end of the third month, the underground city looked different. 2 levels. The first, 32 chambers. A kitchen for 100 people. A farm spanning 5 chambers. 32 troughs. A smithy. A tile-cutting workshop. A warehouse. An office. The main hall had become a square. People gathered there in the evenings. They talked. Sometimes someone sang. Second level, 20 chambers were inhabited. A second smithy. A second water collection point. The column hall had become the main passageway between the chambers. The water columns were still working. Ella connected them to the farm. Water from the columns flowed through stone gutters straight into the troughs. A 1,000-year-old automatic irrigation system. 93 people. Each had a name on the wall. Each had a place. Each had a job. Winter wasn't over. Spring had arrived unnoticed. Horst reported that the snow up top had begun to melt. Puddles on the stone. The sun peeking through the clouds. A warm breeze. Dane climbed up to look. After 3 months underground, the light hit his eyes so hard that he squinted and stood there for a minute, getting used to it. The wasteland stone glistened with moisture. The air smelled of wet minerals. And on the horizon, far, far away, a green strip. Grass. Somewhere on the edge of the wasteland, the first grass was sprouting. He stood and breathed. Gregor climbed up after him, stood beside him, was silent, then said quietly, "We made it." Dane nodded. "We made it." 3 days later, the first caravan arrived. Not Walter, another merchant, from Granholm. He'd heard about the salt and the tiles. He came with 3 carts. He wanted to see the goods. Dine met him on the surface, didn't take him down, showed him the tiles, showed him the salt. The merchant felt them. He clicked his tongue. He named a price. Dane named his. The merchant laughed. Dane didn't laugh. The merchant stopped laughing. They settled on a middle ground, but Dane added a condition. Regular deliveries, once every 10 days. Grain, meat, cloth, lumber, tools, and a few other things. Dane handed the merchant a list. The merchant read it. He looked up. Lighting stones, defective ones, seeds, a list of 12 crops, copper wire, glass jars, ink, and paper. The merchant asked why the prince wanted defective stones. Dane replied that it was his business. The merchant shrugged. Money has no smell. He left. 10 days later, he returned with the first shipment. Dane began building in earnest. Paper and ink changed everything. For 3 months, he had been sketching with charcoal on the walls. Now he had paper. He sat down in his office and in 2 days drew a complete plan of the underground city. Not a sketch, a full-fledged project. Scale, dimensions, levels, ventilation shafts, waterways, farms, forges, warehouses, residential quarters, production chambers, 6 levels deep, 20,000 inhabitants. He hung the drawing on the wall of the main hall. People came up and looked. Not everyone understood, but those who did stood transfixed. Gareth stood in front of the drawing for half an hour. Then he turned to Dane and said, "It's impossible." Dane looked at him. Gareth paused. Then he said, "But 3 months ago, I would have said that a turnip underground was impossible too." Hana approached the blueprint. She studied it for an hour, silently. Then she took out a piece of paper, her own, and began to calculate. Loads, rock volumes, man-hours. 2 days later, she came to Dane with the results. At the current pace of work and with the current number of people, the entire project would take 70 years. Dane nodded. He knew. That's why we need more people, many more. And not just people. Specialists, bricklayers, blacksmiths, carpenters, engineers, lighting mages. Spring meant roads. Roads meant people. People would come. War was raging in the empire. Villages were burning, cities were starving, but here there was warmth, water, work, bread. He was right. They came with the first warmth, 5 at a time, 10, 20. By the end of the first week of spring, the population had surpassed 120. By the end of the second, 150. This was a different wave, not frozen refugees, workers. People who had heard that in the wasteland they paid with food and shelter for work, that the prince didn't beat them, that the rules were fair, that a tile with your name on it went to the capital. Among them was she, Ashley Rain, the Baron's daughter. Dane didn't know that when she arrived. He saw a girl of about 19, fair-haired, slender, with a younger sister of about 15 who was hiding behind her back, both in clothes that had once been fine, dirty, torn. Dane asked the usual questions: name, what you can do. Ashley straightened up. She tried to smile. She said she was the daughter of Baron Rain from the eastern foothills. The barony had been ravaged by war. Her father had died. They had fled. They had walked for 2 months. The younger one's name was Mira. She was 15. She didn't speak. She had been mute since birth. She stopped speaking when she saw the house burning. Dane looked at them. 2 of them. Children of the war his brothers are waging. He asked what they could do. Ashley hesitated. Her hands fidgeted with the fabric of her skirt. She said she could read and write, and count. Her father taught her to keep the household accounts. But that probably isn't very useful. Dane raised an eyebrow. Not very useful? He took her to the office. He showed her the wall with the names. 93 names written in charcoal. Half of them had already been washed away by condensation. He said he needed someone to keep track of everything. Every person, every sack of grain, every tile, every stone, every tool. Write everything down. Count everything. Remember everything. Ashley looked at the wall, at the smudged names, at Dane's illegible handwriting. Then she said, I need a book, and ink, and a desk, and light. Dane nodded. It'll be done. A week later, the office looked different. Ashley cleaned the wall. She copied all the names into a book. She started a registry. Name, age, where from, skills, living quarters, assignment. Next to it, a second ledger, supplies, grain, meat, salt, tools, stones, wood. Everything counted, everything recorded, updated every day. Dane watched her work, and inside, Daniel felt what he'd felt when they'd finally hired a decent project manager for him in Seoul. Relief. He no longer had to keep everything in his head. Ashley calculated faster than he did, in her head, without paper. He dictated the delivery figures and watched her eyes move, adding, multiplying, dividing. The result was instant. He once asked where she got it from. She shrugged, said she'd always been able to do it. Her father said she had a head for numbers. But it was no use. The Baroness doesn't need arithmetic. The Baroness needs a husband. She said it flatly, without bitterness, like a fact. Dine remained silent. Then he said that here, she needed arithmetic more than a husband. Ashley looked at him. Something flashed in her eyes, quickly. Then she went back to her book. Mira's younger sister didn't speak, but she was drawing. Dine discovered this by accident. He walked into the cell where the sisters lived and saw a drawing on the wall, in charcoal, a columned hall, accurate, with perspective, with shadows from the torches. So detailed that Dine thought for a second he was looking out a window. He asked Ashley who had drawn it. Ashley said it was Mira. She's been drawing since she was 5, before with paints, now with whatever she can find. Dine found Mira. The girl had curled up in a corner. He didn't go close to her. He sat on the floor 3 steps away. He placed paper and ink in front of her, and left. The next day, there was a drawing on the paper. Gregor's face, so lifelike that Dine recoiled. Every wrinkle, every hair, eyes tired and warm. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he went to Gareth, told him that the artist's tiles would now come in 2 varieties, carved and drawn. Gareth asked what to use to draw on stone. Dane said that was a question for Owen. Owen thought about it for 3 days. Then he made a bundle of thin metal rods. Mira took them, and on a smooth limestone tile, she scratched out a portrait. Thin lines on gray stone, the face of a woman holding a child. When Walter saw it, he offered 3 times as much for it as for the carved one. By mid-spring, Dane had tallied the interim results. 162 people, 2 levels, 3 forges, 7 farms. The tiles were shipped in batches every 10 days. Salt was shipped separately, the first iron products. Owen began forging plows at the second forge with reinforced draft. Simple, sturdy, cheap. Walter took the first plow away as a sample. A week later, an order for 20 arrived. Iron in the Empire was becoming more expensive due to the war, but Dane found a vein of red iron ore on the second level. A small one, but enough to start their own smelting. Hannah found the vein, or rather she sensed it, by the color of the rock, by the smell, by the way the pickaxe bounced off the rock. She turned to Dane and said there was iron behind that wall. Dane looked at the wall, he tapped it, he listened, he nodded. They broke through and found it. Reddish rock, hematite, 40% iron content. Not rich ore, but their own. No need to buy it, no need to haul it in. Just take it and smelt it. Hannah looked at the vein and her eyes were burning. Dane saw it, the eyes of a person who had found what she'd spent her whole life learning for, a place where her knowledge was needed, where she is heard, where a crack in the ceiling is checked instead of ignored. She turned to him, she said quietly, "It's safe here." Dane nodded. "It's safe here, because we're building it right." She nodded and went back to work. That evening, Ashley brought him tea. Not tea in the usual sense. A decoction of herbs that Ella had gathered on the surface. Bitter, warm. Dane was sitting in the office poring over blueprints. Ashley set the mug on the table. He looked up, thanked her. She didn't leave. She stood there. Then she said that according to her calculations, with their current income from tiles and salt and their current expenses on provisions, they had a surplus. A small one, but a surplus. For the first time. Dane looked at her. She was smiling, quietly, with the corners of her lips. A surplus wasn't an abstraction to her. A surplus meant that Mira would have food tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and a month from now. Dane nodded. Good. A surplus means we can invest. Ashley tilted her head. In what? Dane said. In people. Every extra sack of grain is a person you can call upon. And every person is a pair of hands that builds. Ashley thought. Then she nodded and went off to do the math. Dane drank bitter tea and looked at the blueprints. 6 levels, 20,000 residents, 6 months, half a year in this world. Dane stood on the surface and looked out at the wasteland. The stone was dry, the wind carried dust, the sun beat down from above, nothing on the horizon, the same dead landscape as on the first day. But now he knew there was a city beneath his feet. 203 people, 2 levels, 64 living quarters, 9 farms, 3 forges, a tile workshop, an ironworking shop, a dining hall, an infirmary that Ella had set up in a separate room, a school, yes, a school. It was Ashley's idea. She had come to him a month ago and said there were 14 children in the city. They run around the corridors all day. They get in the workers' way. They get underfoot. Dane replied that children are children. Ashley said that children are future workers, who in 5 years will be breaking stone or keeping the books, and it's better if they come to it prepared. Dane looked at her. He thought, and agreed. Ashley became a teacher. 3 hours in the mornings, reading, writing, arithmetic. 14 children in a cell with a green lightstone. Mira sat among them and drew on the wall. She didn't speak, but when Ashley explained something using her fingers, Mira drew. Diagrams, pictures, illustrations of what her sister was saying. The children understood the drawings faster than the words. By the 6th month, what Dane had both hoped for and feared happened. The inspector. He arrived on horseback, with 2 soldiers in imperial uniforms. He stopped on the surface at the southern entrance. He asked Horst at the guard post where the prince was. Horst said he was down below. The inspector looked at the hole in the ground, at the steps leading down, at the warm air rising from the depths, and his face changed. He didn't know. No one in the capital knew what was happening here. The gray wasteland was listed in the documents as dead land, 700 square miles of rock, 0 population, 0 income, 0 interest. The inspector's name was Gottfried, short, neat, with the cold eyes of a bureaucrat who had seen it all and believed nothing. Cassian had sent him, the second prince, not out of suspicion, out of habit. Cassian controlled everything, every fief, every province, yes, even the dead. Dane met him on the 1st level, in the main hall. He hid nothing. He didn't hide the city. He didn't hide the people. He showed everything. The water collection system, the farms, the forges, workshops. He led him through the chambers, introduced him to the people. Gottfried walked in silence. He looked, he counted, hands behind his back, his face inscrutable. When he saw the farm, he stopped. He stared for a long time at the trays of greens in the lilac light. Then he asked how. Dane explained. Light-emitting stones. A specific spectrum. Soil mix. Water. Heat. Gottfried listened. Then he asked where he had learned this. Dine answered. He read books. He thought. He experimented. Gottfried looked at him. An 18-year-old boy, skinny, pale, in a plain shirt, with ink stains on his fingers, unlike any prince Gottfried had seen in 20 years of service. He asked how many people. Dane answered honestly. 203. Gottfried raised an eyebrow. On barren land, without arable fields, without a river, without a forest. 203 people who aren't starving. He wrote something down in the book, spent another 2 hours, inspected everything, recorded everything, then sat down at the desk in the office. Ashley brought him tea. Gottfried looked at the ledgers, at the neat columns of numbers, at the registers. He looked at Ashley. He asked who kept the records. Ashley replied that she did. Gottfried leafed through the book, then he closed it, and for the first time all day his expression changed. Not a smile, a shadow of surprise. He said that in half the provinces of the empire, the record-keeping was worse than in this cave. Ashley didn't answer, but she sat up straight. Gottfried turned to Dane. He said that his report would be objective. Facts are facts. The fief functions. The population is provided for. Taxes. Dane nodded. Taxes. He had expected this. Every fiefdom pays taxes to the empire, even barren land. Gottfried named the amount, the standard rate, for 203 people, in silver. Dane did the math. The sum was substantial. Not ruinous, but substantial. He could pay with salt, or with tiles, or with iron. But to pay meant to be visible, to be in the system, to be on paper. 203 people in an underground city on the eastern outskirts. Cassian would read the report, and he would think about it. Dane looked at Gottfried. He asked if the payment could be deferred until the end of the year. He explained that the fief was young, expenses for setting up. People arrived in winter with nothing. Gottfried was silent. Then he said he'd give 3 months. He couldn't do more. Dane nodded. 3 months. In 3 months, he'd double production. He escorted the inspector upstairs. Gottfried mounted his horse. He looked down at Dane and said one thing, quietly, so the soldiers wouldn't hear. He said the prince should be careful. A fief that doesn't look like a fief attracts attention. And the attention of the senior princes is not something to be taken lightly. It's different. Dane nodded. He knew. Gottfried rode off. Dane stood on the surface and watched as the 3 horsemen grew smaller on the horizon. Hannah stood beside him, silently. Then she said, "He'll report it." Dane replied, "Of course he will. That's his job." Hannah asked what they would do. Dane turned and walked downstairs. As he walked, he said, "Build faster." The next 2 weeks passed at a frantic pace. Dane went down to the 3rd level, with Hannah, with Darren, with Bert, with the 4 best workers. The 3rd level was different. The passage down from the columned hall did not go straight but in a spiral staircase carved into the rock. The steps were wide, even. The walls were covered with the same symbols, geometric, precise. Dane touched them as he walked. He didn't linger. Time. The spiral led them to a landing. The landing opened onto a hall. Dane entered and stopped. The hall was not just large, it was designed, like a work of architecture. The ceiling was a dome, perfect, round, with an opening in the center through which a column of warm air rose from below, a ventilation shaft built into the structure. The walls were not smooth but stepped, terraces, stone terraces rising upward in tiers, like an amphitheater, or like rice paddies on a mountainside. Dane froze. He understood. It was a farm, an ancient underground farm, terraces for planting, a dome for air circulation, a central shaft for ventilation and heat. The same principle he'd used up above, only on a scale he hadn't even considered. There were 20 terraces, each 2 meters wide, circling the perimeter, hundreds of square meters of planting area, more than all 9 of his farms above combined. If he planted it all, if he installed the lightstones, if he brought in water, this hall could feed 1,000 people. Dane stood in the center of the dome and looked up. Air flowed through the opening, warm, steady. He closed his eyes and listened, the breath of the depths. They were here before him, 1,000 years ago. They built a city in stone, grew food in the darkness, lived underground. They weren't hiding, they were living. And they built better than he did. Much better. Hana stood beside him. She was silent. Then she spoke. Master. He sensed something. Dane opened his eyes. He looked at her. She was looking at the wall, at the symbols, at one symbol that repeated more often than the others. A circle, with a cross inside. A crossed-out sun. Hana pointed at it and said she'd seen the same one up above, by the eastern cliff, above the entrance to the passage with the green glow. Dane nodded. He remembered. The crossed-out sun. A symbol they'd seen on every level, on every wall. A warning, or a name, or both. They went back upstairs with a plan. The third level, the amphitheater. Food production on a scale that would solve all their supply problems forever. All it needed was time, people, and light. Dane sent Walter for a new batch of stones, the biggest one, 50 of them, any kind. Walter asked where he could get that many. Dane said that in the capital, mages produced them by the hundreds. 90% were defective. The defective ones were stored away. Nobody needed them. Walter nodded. He promised. And 3 weeks later, he brought back 62 stones. Dane would have kissed him if it had been appropriate. 62 sources of light. He distributed them across the terraces. A pink and purple glow flooded the dome. Shadows danced on the walls. The terraces were filled with light. Ella came down. She saw. She didn't speak for 10 minutes. She walked across the terraces and touched the stones. Then she sat on the bottom step and said quietly, "A year. 365 days." Dane stood on the third-level terrace and looked at what he had grown. A wall of greenery. Turnips sticking out of the soil in sturdy balls. Peas twining around the stone supports that Gareth had carved out specifically. Lentils like a carpet. And on the top terrace, tomatoes. Red, ripe, round. 4 bushes, 12 fruits. Small, rye, but red. Real. He picked one. Turned it over in his fingers. Warm, firm, smelling of summer. He carried it upstairs, found Kira in the kitchen, placed the tomato on the table in front of her, said nothing. Kira looked up, saw it, took it in her hands, brought it to her nose. Her face broke. She didn't cry, she broke, like a wall that had held for a year and finally gave way. She pressed the tomato to her chest and bent over. Her shoulders shook. Dane stood nearby, silent. Kira's children ran up. They saw their mother. They were frightened. Then they saw the red orb in her hands. The youngest reached out. Kira straightened up. She wiped her face. She cut the tomato into 4 pieces, one for herself, one for each of her 2 children, and she placed the 4th piece in front of Dane. He took it. He ate it. Sour, not quite ripe. The best tomato of his life, in both lives. A year. In a year, the world hadn't become any kinder. The empire was ablaze. Reinhold, the first prince, had taken the 2 northern provinces and stood 3 passes from the capital. Cassian, the second prince, controlled the south and the fleet. Vernon, the third prince, had holed up in the mountain fortresses of the west and was intercepting caravans. The old Emperor Johann was still breathing, but everyone knew it was a matter of months, maybe weeks. Trade routes were collapsing, prices rose every week. Walter came less and less often, and each time he brought less. Not out of greed, there were no goods. Troops were raiding the supply trains, roads were blocked, peasants were hiding their grain. The world was starving, and beneath a rock in the gray wasteland, 200 people were eating tomatoes. The population was growing more slowly. 211, 230. By the anniversary, 248. Dane was no longer accepting everyone. He couldn't, not physically, not logistically. The third level wasn't fully settled yet. The 4th hadn't been started. They needed to expand quickly, but correctly. Sloppy work would be the death of them. He knew that. Hana knew. Every new passage was calculated. Every arch was checked. Every support was in place. Slowly, correctly, forever. But time was running out. He could feel it. Gottfried's report had gone to Cassian 3 months ago. Silence. No reaction. That was more alarming than any action. Cassian wasn't the type who forgets. He is the type who waits. Dane was preparing. Not for war, for defense. He had spent 3 evenings with Sarah. No, she had arrived earlier. He needed to explain. She had arrived in the 4th month. Sarah Winter, captain, former captain, 22 years old, a stony face, a straight back, dead eyes. She came with 5 soldiers, the remnants of her company, 5 out of 80. The rest died when Vernon, the third prince, ordered them to fire into a crowd of peasants protesting grain requisitions. Sarah refused. Vernon stripped her of her rank, took away her banner, took away her weapons. 5 went with her. The rest carried out the order. She told this to Dane in an even voice, without pauses, without emotion, like a dead man's report. Dane listened. When she finished, he was silent. Then he said, "Captain Winter, I need a city guard, 20 men, trained, disciplined, not for war, for defense." Sarah blinked. The first sign of life during the entire conversation. He called her captain, not Lady Winter, not General Winter's daughter. Captain, her rank, her achievement, her name. She clenched her jaw, nodded, and left. The next day she began recruiting the guard. From the soldiers who had been with Dane from the start, from those who had come later, from the peasants who wanted to learn how to handle a weapon. She put them through their paces in the second-level corridors. Running, drill, weapons, discipline. But not like in the Imperial Army. No beatings, no humiliation. Sarah ran first. She did every drill herself. If a soldier couldn't do it, she didn't yell. She showed them again and again, until they got it right. In 3 months, the guard had turned into a combat unit. 22 people, not an army, but enough for an underground city. They knew the corridors, knew the passageways, knew where the ambushes were and where the traps lay. Dane spent 3 evenings with Sarah discussing the defenses. He laid out the blueprints, showed her all the entrances and exits. The main southern entrance, the northern ventilation shaft, the eastern one by the cliff, and 4 more small exits that Hana had discovered over 6 months of work. 7 entrances, 7 vulnerable points. Dane showed Sarah what he had in mind. Every entrance except the main one could be collapsed in a minute. Purposely weakened supports. 1 blow with a pickaxe and the tunnel is blocked. The main entrance is protected differently, a narrow passage. Only 1 person can go through it at a time. 10 turns, 3 false dead ends. An army that enters without knowing the way will wander for hours, and the guards will know every stone. Sarah looked at the blueprints, silently. Then she looked up, and said that this wasn't a fortress, it's a labyrinth. Dane replied that a labyrinth is better than a fortress. A fortress can be besieged, a labyrinth cannot. Sarah nodded and added quietly, "But you might not be able to get out of the labyrinth." Dane replied, "If you know the way, you'll always find your way out." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I'll stand at your door, at night." Dane raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Sarah replied, "Because it's my job, captain of the guard." Dane wanted to object. He didn't. He could see from Sarah's face that it wasn't up for discussion. She stood at his door that very night, and the next, and every night after that. Dine once peeked out at 2 in the morning. She was standing there, straight, motionless. The torch cast a shadow on the wall. He told her she needed to sleep. She replied that she slept during the day, and at night she stood watch, because at night princes are killed. He looked at her. She was looking down the hallway, not at him, into the darkness. Her eyes were no longer dead. Something quiet and fierce at the same time burned within them. He closed the door. He didn't argue. The 8th month, the 9th, the 10th. The city was growing. The 3rd level was being settled. The amphitheater yielded a harvest every 3 weeks. Kana led the teams to the 4th level, clearing, surveying, every step forward and every meter down. The 4th level turned out to be industrial. Furnaces, huge stone furnaces built into the walls. They used geothermal heat directly, not through pipes, through contact with the rock. The furnace walls were thin. Behind them ran a hot fissure. The stone heated up to a temperature at which copper could be smelted, maybe even iron. Owen went down. He looked. He touched the walls. He turned on his blacksmith's instinct and said 1 word. Perfect. They fired up the first ancient furnace a week later. Not fully, partially. They cleaned it out, checked the draft, loaded ore from the Hana vein. The result exceeded expectations. The temperature allowed them to smelt iron without coal, without bellows, without anything, just ore and the heat of the earth. The cost of iron dropped to 0. Dane stood by the furnace and watched as the molten metal flowed into a stone mold. Orange light, heat on his face, the smell of hot stone and iron. Owen stood nearby with a hammer in his hands and the face of a man who had found himself in paradise. Dane looked at him. He asked, "How many plows a day?" Owen thought. He answered, 5, maybe 6, if he had an assistant. Dine nodded. 5 plows a day, 35 a week, 150 a month, at prices half those of any competitor because he has no fuel costs. This isn't manufacturing, it's a revolution. The first caravan arrived at the end of the 8th month. Not a merchant, a caravan. 12 wagons. A merchant from Granholm heard about the cheap plows and came in person. He saw the goods. He saw the prices. His eyes went wide. He ordered 300 plows. For the entire next season. He paid in advance, with grain, with cloth, with lumber, and with one item that Dane had specifically requested: scaffolding, treated timber, boards, beams. Heinrich received the lumber and fell silent for 2 days. Then he got to work. He didn't sleep for 3 days. He made bunks for all the new cells, shelves, tables, stools, doors, real wooden doors. The sound of a door closing in an underground city. Privacy. People got privacy. Small rooms with doors that close. A small thing, but Dina knew. A person needs a door they can close, behind which they are alone, or with their family, where no one can see them. It's not a luxury, it's dignity. For the anniversary, Dane convened the first council, not a meeting among trusted confidants. A council, an open one. In the main hall on the first level, everyone who wanted to came, about 150 people. The rest were on shifts. Dane stood on a stone platform that Gareth had carved in the center of the hall. He looked at the faces. Gregor, old, loyal, standing by the wall and nodding to everyone who entered. Hannah, standing with pickaxes in her hands, never lets them go, a miner's habit. Ashley, sitting with a book, ready to take notes. Next to her, Mira with a sheet of paper. Sarah, by the door, upright. She scans the room with her eyes, a professional habit. Kira, in an apron, smells of bread. The children are nearby. Owen, his hands are black with soot. He didn't have time to wash them. Gareth, Bert, Darren, Horst, Caleb, Thomas, Eric, Philip, Ella, Heinrich, Walter, who came especially. Martha from Stonewall. She came. She came downstairs for the first time in a year. Dane saw her and nodded. She nodded back. A promise kept. Stonewall is not forgotten. He spoke for 20 minutes. No grandstanding, no promises. Facts. A year ago, there were 24. Today, there are 248. 3 levels are inhabited. The 4th is under construction. The farm feeds the city. The forge clothes the empire in iron. Tiles and salt travel in caravans. Not a single person has died on the job. Not a single child has gone hungry. He paused. Silence. Then he said, "It's not his doing. It's theirs. Everyone's. He sees everyone. And every day on the office wall, next to each of their names, he writes what that person has done. Because this city wasn't built by a prince. It was built by the mason Gareth, and by blacksmith Owen, and by cook Kira, and by herbalist Ella, and by captain Sarah, and by stonemason Hannah, and by accountant Ashley, a year and a half. The city had changed so much that Dane sometimes didn't recognize his own corridors. 4 levels, 8,000 residents, a number that had seemed impossible just 6 months ago. But people kept coming. The war in the Empire had shifted from a hot phase to a bloody one. Reinhold had laid siege to the capital. Cassian struck him from the rear in the south. Vernon plundered both sides. Villages were burning. Cities closed their gates. The roads had become more dangerous than the forests. And against this backdrop, the rumor of a place where there was neither fire nor hunger spread like a crack in the rock, quietly, unstoppably, in all directions. They came by the hundreds, in families, in villages, in craft guilds. An entire blacksmith's workshop from the city of Warren arrived in full force. 22 blacksmiths with their families, 60 people. Their city had been burned by Vernon's men. The workshop foreman, an old blacksmith named Conrad, stood before Da and said they weren't asking for charity. They were asking for work. They had their hands, they have knowledge, they have tools they carried on their backs for 300 miles. Dane led them to the 4th level. He showed them the ancient forges. Conrad stood before the forge with his mouth agape. Then he turned to his men and said quietly, "Guys, we're home." 22 blacksmiths. Owen had gained an army. He walked among them, his hands trembling. Not from weakness, from excitement. He had been an apprentice. 4 years with a village blacksmith, and now he was leading 22 masters. Dane saw his doubt. He approached him that evening, said that Owen had been here from day one. He knows these forges, knows this ore, he knows this draft. Conrad and his men know their craft. But they don't know this place. Owen does. That makes him the boss. Owen looked at Dane, nodded. The next day he walked into the forge and spoke, quietly, calmly. He explained how the furnaces work, how to load the ore, how to read the color of the metal at this draft. Conrad listened, nodded. And from his face, Dane could see that the old blacksmith had recognized Owen. Not by age, by knowledge. Production exploded. Plows, knives, axes, shovels, staples, hinges, horseshoes, nails. They forged everything that could be forged from iron. Caravans arrived every week. Not just 1, 3, 4. Merchants lined up on the surface. Dane set up a trading post at the south entrance. A stone canopy, tables, scales. Ashley handled all the transactions. Every item was recorded. Every calculation was checked. She hired 3 assistants. She taught them to keep the books. She created a system. Incoming goods, outgoing goods, inventory, debts, advances, taxes. Dane watched her work and realized she had outgrown the office. She was running the city's economy. Not him, her. He designed the walls. She calculated what was inside. One evening he told her this, that she was managing the economy. That without her, the city would grind to a halt in a week. Ashley looked up from her books. She looked at him and said quietly that people used to tell her all they needed from her was a face and a surname. But here, they needed her brain. And that was the best thing anyone had ever said to her. Dine said nothing. Ashley went back to her books, but the corners of her lips twitched. The Council of Masters. Dane had established it 6 months ago. Now it met every 10 days. 12 people. Hannah, mining. Owen, forges. Gareth, construction. Ella, farms. Ashley, accounting and trade. Sarah, security. Kira, food and daily life. Bert, transportation and logistics within the city. Heinrich, woodworking. Conrad, manufacturing. Caleb, external intelligence and communications. And Gregor, no official position, just Gregor, who sat in the corner, listened, and occasionally spoke a single sentence that put everything into perspective. Dane did not preside. He listened. He asked questions. He clarified. Decisions were made through discussion. If they couldn't agree, Dane had the final say. But that rarely happened. People who build together usually think along the same lines. He convened the council at the beginning of the 18th month and raised the issue. Cassian's army. Caleb reported. The scouts he had sent to the southern roads had seen movement. Troops. Many troops. Heading east. Heading for the gray wasteland. Silence at the table. Hannah clenched her pickaxe. Sarah sat up straight. Her eyes grew cold, warlike. Dane spread out a map, a large one, drawn by Mira from his blueprints. The gray wasteland. 7 entrances. 4 levels. Corridors. Halls. Passages, false dead ends, collapsing sections. He spoke quietly, calmly, without panic. Cassian won't come with 100 soldiers. He'll come with an army. He's not stupid. He knows about the city, knows about trade, knows that the wasteland has become a hub. And he can't let that happen, because a hub he doesn't control is a threat. Sarah asked how many. Dane answered. Caleb estimates between 3,000 and 6,000. The silence grew heavier. 22 guards against 6,000. Dane continued. They won't fight. Not like that. The surface is empty. Not a single building. Not a single landmark. The army that comes will see stone. Stone and wind. They won't find the city, because there is no city, on the surface. And they won't go underground. Or they will, and they'll regret it. He pointed on the map. The main entrance will be closed. Camouflaged. Rocks. Dust. In a week, Gareth will make it invisible. The small entrances have been collapsed. One remains. The one Dane prepared. One entrance. Wide. Well-lit, inviting, and leading into a labyrinth. 10 turns, 3 false dead ends, 2 sections to be collapsed, and at the end, a hall, large, warm, with a set table. Sarah looked at him. Asked why the table, Dane answered. Because he doesn't want to kill 6,000 people. He wants to feed them. Silence. Gregor in the corner smirked, the first one in the entire council. The preparations took 3 weeks. Gareth worked on the surface. He camouflaged the main entrance so that from 10 paces away it was indistinguishable from the rock. Hannah collapsed 4 small entrances, neatly, controlled. Every collapse was calculated down to the last stone. Sarah posted guards, not at the entrance, deep inside, in positions known only to them. Caleb went on a reconnaissance mission. He returned 5 days later. The news was worse than expected. Not 3,000, 6,000. 6,000 soldiers under the command of General Morris, Cassian's best commander. With them, a supply train of 200 wagons, siege engines, battering rams. They advanced slowly, confidently, as if on a stroll. Dane listened and nodded. 6,000, siege engines, battering rams. All of this is useless against what cannot be seen. The army arrived on the 22nd day of the 18th month. Dane stood at the observation post, a narrow crevice in the rock 30 meters high, camouflaged, invisible from the outside. He watched. 6,000 men stretched out across the rock, a forest of spears, Cassian's banners, blue with silver. General Morris rode ahead on a white horse, handsome, confident, a standard-bearer beside him. Behind him, the staff, officers, maps in their hands. They stopped in the center of the wasteland, set up camp, sent out scouts. The scouts returned empty-handed. Rock, emptiness, no buildings, no people, no tracks. Dane watched for 3 days. The army stood still. Morris sent detachments in different directions. They returned with the same result. Nothing. The provisions in the supply train were meant for a march, not for standing still. On the 4th day, they found a passage. The very one. The only one open. Wide. Well lit. The scouts reported to Morris. The general thought. He had no choice. The target was here. Under the rock. They had to go down. He sent 300 men ahead. The best of the best. In heavy armor, with torches. They entered the passage and disappeared. Dane knew what was happening inside. The passage led downward, gently, comfortably. Then the first turn, the second, the third. The torches illuminated the smooth walls, then a dead end, a fork, left, right. The soldiers chose, they went, another dead end, another fork. An hour later, they didn't know where the entrance was. 2 hours later, their torches began to go out. 4 hours later, they sat in the dark and screamed. Sarah's guards heard every scream. They stood in passages the soldiers couldn't see, behind walls, in niches, silently, waiting. At the 6th hour, Dane gave the order. Arak ran through the corridors. The guards opened the passages. They did not attack. They opened them. Light poured into the tunnels where 300 soldiers sat. They saw the passage, wide, lit. They went. They came out into the hall, a huge hall at the junction of the 2nd and 3rd levels. In the center, a table, long, set, hot porridge, bread, water, meat, for 300 people. The soldiers stood and watched. Then one sat down, then a second. 10 minutes later, all 300 were eating in silence. Someone was crying. They hadn't eaten a hot meal in 3 days. The supply train had fallen behind. Their rations were gone. And here was a bowl of porridge and bread. Dane came out to them when they had finished eating. He stood at the head of the table, thin, pale, 18 years old, in a plain shirt, unarmed. He said, "You are my guests. Your general can come down and eat too, or you can go back and tell him what's here." Morris came down the next day, alone, without a guard. This surprised Dane. He had expected an entourage, or at least a couple of officers, but the general came alone. Tall, graying at the temples, a stern but intelligent face, attentive eyes. He stopped at the entrance to the hall and looked around, silently, like Gottfried 6 months ago, like a professional assessing the situation. Dane was waiting for him at the table. Gregor stood nearby, no one else. Morris approached, sat down, looked at Dane, and said that his men had told him some interesting things. About the labyrinth, about the darkness, about how the walls moved. The walls didn't move. The guards opened and closed the passages. But to the soldiers in the dark, it seemed as though the walls were alive. Dane didn't bother to explain, let the legend do its work. Morris said that Prince Cassian had sent him to take control of the wasteland, by any means necessary. Dane nodded. He understands. Morris continued. But he's a general, not a butcher. He won't lead 6,000 men into the darkness where 300 elite soldiers got lost in an hour. This isn't war. It's suicide. Dane listened. Morris fell silent. He waited. Dane spoke, quietly, without threats, without ultimatums. He said he didn't want war, didn't want independence, didn't want the throne. He wanted one thing, to be left in peace. The wasteland pays its taxes. The wasteland trades. The wasteland threatens no one. If Cassian wants cheap iron and plows, he'll get them, by treaty, not by the sword. Morris listened. Then he asked what Dane was specifically proposing. Dane pulled out a piece of paper, a contract. Ashley had drafted it in 3 days. Every clause was carefully worded. The wasteland would supply Cassian with iron and plows at a fixed price below market value. The wasteland pays the standard tax. In return, Cassian recognizes the autonomy of the fief and does not send troops into the wasteland's territory. Trade caravans pass freely. Disputes are resolved through negotiation. Morris read it. He reread it. He looked at Dane and said it wasn't up to him to decide. He would deliver the proposal to Cassian, but he would add his own thoughts. He had assessed the situation. He had seen cities taken by storm. He had seen fortresses that surrendered after a siege. But a city that didn't exist on the surface and that fed you after you came to capture it, he had never seen anything like that. He stood up, nodded, and left. The army stood idle for 2 more days. Dane them. Every day, pots of porridge were brought up. Bread, water. The soldiers ate. Some went down to warm themselves. The guards let them through, unarmed, one at a time. They went in and looked around. They saw cells, farms, forges, children, women at work, men breaking stone. A normal life, underground. One soldier stood by a farm for 10 minutes. He looked at the tomatoes. Then he turned to the guard and asked if he could stay. The guard didn't know what to say. He took him to Dane. Dane asked what he could do. The soldier said he'd been a carpenter before joining the army. Dane said Henry needed an assistant. The soldier took off his breastplate. He laid his sword on the floor and followed the guard. By evening, 4 more. Morris noticed. He said nothing. On the 3rd day, the army broke camp. It marched west. 6,000-5. Dane stood at the lookout post and watched as the banners disappeared over the horizon. Hannah stood beside him, silently. Then she said, "They'll be back." Dine replied, "Maybe, but not soon. Cassian has more serious problems than us right now. Reinhold is at the capital's walls. Vernon has intercepted the southern fleet. Cassian has no time for underground cities. Not yet." Hannah nodded. Then she asked what next. Dane looked at the horizon. Down. The 5th level. It's time. The 5th level turned out to be something Dane hadn't expected. The passage down from the 4th level wasn't a spiral or an inclined plane. It went straight down, a shaft, deep, smooth, square in cross-section, 3 by 3 meters, with ledges on the walls every half meter. Steps, but not for people, for something else. The ledges were too small for a foot, too frequent, as if someone had been climbing down, clinging with their fingers, or as if something had been traveling up and down these ledges like rails. An elevator. Daniel realized. It was an elevator, a lifting mechanism. The ledges were the rails. A cabin or platform moved along them. The mechanism was at the top, or at the bottom. He looked up. Above the shaft, in the ceiling, was a niche, a large one, with the remains of something wooden, decayed over 1,000 years. A mounting, a block, a counterweight. A system that operated on the simplest principles of mechanics. No magic, no motor. A counterweight and a lever. Daniel could restore it. Bert could make the ropes. Heinrich the platform. Conrad the mechanism. He wrote it down. Later. Now they were descending on ropes. Dane, Hannah, Caleb. 30 meters down. Total depth from the surface was about 100 meters. The rock pressure was intense, but the mine walls were perfect. No cracks, no shifts. The builder's craftsmanship was astonishing every time. The 5th level was residential, not industrial, not storage, residential. The chambers were larger than on any other level, with sleeping alcoves, with stone tables, with shelves, and with something Dane hadn't seen before. Channels in the floor, narrow, deep, covered with stone lids. He lifted one. Water, warm, flowing, a water supply. An underground water supply to every cell. 1,000 years ago there was hot water here, in every house. Dane sat on the floor of the 5th level cell and watched the water flowing through the channel. Clear, clean, warm. And he thought about how the people who built this were better than him. Not smarter, though maybe they were smarter, better. They thought about people, every detail for comfort, for life, not for survival, for life. Hannah stood nearby, silently. Then she sat down. She touched the water with her fingers and said quietly, "Master." Who were they? Dane shook his head. He didn't know, but he was going to find out, because there were more symbols on the walls of the 5th level, and they had changed. Not just geometry, drawings, scenes, people, figures in strange clothing, working, building, living, and on every wall in every chamber, a crossed-out sun, a symbol that ran through all the levels, a warning that Dane couldn't read yet. He spent the whole day on the 5th level. He went through every cell. He sketched every symbol, every drawing, every scene. 20 sheets of paper covered in small handwriting. By the time he went upstairs, it was late. Ashley was waiting for him in the office with tea. He sat down, spread out the sheets, looked at them. Ashley looked over his shoulder. She saw the drawings, figures of people, symbols. She asked what they were. Dane replied that he didn't know, but he needed someone who did, a historian, an expert on ancient civilizations. Ashley thought for a moment. Then she said she'd heard of scholars who studied pre-imperial ruins in the north. The academy in the capital had a department of ancient history, but they'd closed it. The subject was considered heretical. Too many uncomfortable questions about who came before the empire. Dane nodded. Closed, so those people were out of work, so they could be found. He wrote a letter, a short one, unsigned, no name, just a description of the symbols and a question. Do you know what this is? He sent it with Walter, quietly, through trade channels. The reply came a month later, not by letter, in person. A small woman of 28 stood at the city gate with a sack slung over her shoulders, disheveled, with wild eyes. Yuna Cho. She had walked 300 miles in 20 days, because on the sheet of paper the merchant had given her were symbols she had seen in her dreams since she was 15. Yuna didn't speak for the first 2 days, not from shock, from being overwhelmed. Dane led her down, through all the levels, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. She walked and touched the walls, every one. She stopped at every symbol. She moved her lips. Dane could see that she was reading, not quickly, slowly, syllable by syllable, like a child learning a new language, but she was reading. On the 5th level, she stopped in front of a wall with drawings. She stood there for 20 minutes, silently. Then she sat down on the floor and cried, for 20 minutes. Dane stood nearby and waited. He didn't touch her. He didn't comfort her. He waited. She wiped her face, stood up, turned to him, eyes red but dry, and said that she'd been told her whole life that she was crazy, that the underground civilization was a myth, that before the empire there was nothing but barbarism and chaos. And here on the wall were drawings of people who lived better than those in the capital. Plumbing, farms, ventilation, systems that still don't exist up there. Dane nodded. He knew that feeling, being the only one who sees the truth and being punished for it. He said she needed time, work, paper, light, and for no one to bother her. She would get everything. Yuna nodded and went downstairs. From that day on, she lived on the 5th level. She only went up for meals, and not even always. Kira started sending her plates with Eric. Eric would run back and report that the scientist was sitting on the floor among the papers, talking to herself. Dane smiled. He talked to himself too, a professional habit. Yuna worked for 3 weeks. Then she came to Dane, with a stack of papers, with wild eyes that now burned not with madness, but with understanding. She spread the papers out on the table. Dine, Hannah, Ashley, Gregor, everyone was watching. Yuna spoke quickly, stammering, jumping from thought to thought. Dine asked her to slow down. She took a deep breath and started over. The civilization that built this called itself Litor, which means people of stone, or people under the stone. The meaning is twofold. They had lived here not for 100 years, not 200, presumably 700 or more. 7 levels, each for a specific function. The first, the top, contact with the surface, trade, receiving guests. The second, administration and storage. The third, agriculture. Fourth, production. Fifth, housing. Sixth, science and education. Seventh, something Yuna couldn't decipher yet. The symbols on the 7th level, if it exists, were different, more complex, more disturbing, linked to a crossed-out sun. She said the Littora went underground not because of people, not because of war, because of something from the sky. There were scenes on the walls, the sky on fire, a light that kills, people falling, and then darkness. And after the darkness, stone. Stone as protection, stone as a home, stone as salvation. They hid from what they called by a word that Yuna roughly translated, the thing that watches, not just the sun, something in the sun, or behind the sun, something that sometimes looks down, and when it looks down, all life on the surface perishes. Dane listened. Inside, Daniel was running through the possibilities. A solar flare, a coronal mass ejection, a gamma ray burst, something that could sterilize the surface. The thickness of the rock protects against radiation. 12 meters of limestone is equivalent to several meters of concrete, enough to survive any solar cataclysm. They knew. 1,000 years ago, they knew what Daniel had learned in college. Or maybe they didn't know. They just survived. And they wrote it on the walls so that those who came after would remember. He asked Yuna why they had left. If the city had stood for 1,000 years, why was it empty? Yuna fell silent. Then she said she didn't know yet. The answer was on the 6th or 7th level, if they made it there. Dane nodded. They would make it, but not today. Today there are other problems. Cassian's reply came 2 months after the army left. Not by letter, in person. A horseman in fine clothes, with the seal of the second prince, an ambassador. His name was Marcus, polite, smiling, with cold eyes. He brought Cassian's reply. The prince accepts the contract proposal, with one condition. He wants a personal meeting with Dane, on neutral ground, in a month. Dane read the letter, read it again, looked at Marcus, asked why a personal meeting. Marcus smiled and said that Prince Cassian wants to look into the eyes of the man who fed his army instead of fighting it. Dine thought it over. The council met that evening. Opinions were divided. Sarah was categorically against it. A trap. Hannah agreed with Sarah. Caleb said it could be both a trap and an opportunity. It depends on the terms. Ashley did the math. A contract with Cassian would double their trade volume. Cassian controls the southern ports, access to the sea, to goods not found in the east, fabrics, spices, tools that can't be forged in a smithy. Gregor was silent. Then he said one sentence. Better to make a deal with a predator than to wait until he gets hungry again. Dane made his decision. He would go, but not to neutral territory. He would invite Cassian here, to the city, underground. Let him see with his own eyes what his army didn't see. Marcus conveyed the invitation. 3 weeks later, a reply arrived. Cassian would come, in person, with a small entourage, in 10 days. Dane began preparing the city, not for defense, for display. Gareth cleaned the walls. Heinrich polished the wooden structures. Kira prepared the finest food. Ella decorated the amphitheater farm so that the terraces looked like hanging gardens. Mira painted. Paintings appeared on the walls of the main hall. Scenes from city life, work, construction, children, light in the darkness. Dane didn't ask. Mira did it on her own, as if she sensed that someone needed to see it. Cassian arrived on the 9th day, earlier than he'd promised, with 10 horsemen. No army, no general. Dane met him at the south entrance, on the surface. They stood facing each other for the first time in their lives. Cassian, 34 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, a handsome face with intelligent eyes, dressed simply, no ostentatious luxury. An expensive but unassuming cloak, a sword at his belt, but his hands are relaxed. Not the posture of a warrior. The posture of a ruler who knows that the sword is not the primary weapon. Dane, 18, slender, pale, in a work jacket, ink on his fingers. No sword, no weapons, no entourage, only Gregor by his side. Cassian looked at him and smiled. That very smile little Dane remembered. Warm, with empty eyes. But the eyes weren't quite empty. There was curiosity in them, genuine. He said, "Little brother." "You've grown," Dane replied. "Follow me." He led Cassian downstairs, through all the levels, in silence, showing, not explaining. Cassian walked and looked. Farms, forges, workshops, the school, the infirmary, children playing in the corridors, women at the looms that Heinrich had assembled from wood and rope. Men breaking stone under Hana's supervision. Water flowing through stone channels. Heat rising from the depths of the earth. The light of luminous stones. Purple, green, yellow. A city that lived, breathed, and worked. Invisible from the surface. Impossible by all the laws of this world, and yet it existed. Cassian didn't say a word until the very end. Dane led him into the hall at the junction of the second and third levels. The very same hall where 300 soldiers had been fed 3 months ago. The table was set. For two. Hot food, clean water, bread, tomatoes, fresh, red, in winter. Cassian sat down. He looked at the tomato. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, took a bite, chewed slowly. Then he put it back on the table and looked at Dane. He said, "You realize what you've done. You've built a state within a state," Dane replied. "No, I built a place where people won't freeze." Cassian was silent. Then he said quietly, "Father is dying. Reinhold stands at the walls of the capital. Vernon has intercepted the fleet. The empire is crumbling. And the only place where people don't freeze is the cave of my younger brother, whom I haven't seen in 10 years, and whom I thought would die before he turned 20. Dane said nothing. Cassian signed the contract that evening. 2 years, 20,000 residents, the number Dane had written on the blueprint a year ago. Back then, Gareth had said it was impossible. Now Gareth was in charge of a construction crew of 120 masons and couldn't keep up with the flow of people. 6 levels. Dane looked down at the city from above. From the observation deck on the first level, the main hall had become a square, shopping arcades, workshops, a tavern opened by a former innkeeper from Granholm, a school that Ashley had expanded to 3 classrooms, a temple, small, stone. The people asked for it. Dane built it. He didn't believe in the gods of this world, but the people did, and they needed a place to believe. The second level, administration, the chancellery, the council of masters, the archives, a library that Yuna had assembled from everything she could get her hands on through merchants. Third level, farms. The amphitheater fed 5,000. 15 more greenhouse farms provided the rest. Lentils, peas, turnips, greens, tomatoes, and that strange red plant from ancient seeds. It grew into a tree, not a big one, about 2 meters tall, with a wide crown, and it bore fruit, reddish, the size of an apple, sweet, unlike anything else. Ella didn't know what it was. Yuna had found it in the drawings on the 5th level. The Latora grew them. It was their main tree. The fruits kept for months, nutritious as meat, sweet as fruit. They called it the stone fruit. Dane planted cuttings from the first tree on all the farms. 6 months later, they had 20 trees. A year later, 100. The stone fruit became the symbol of the city, the 4th level, the forges. Owen and Conrad managed the production that supplied half the eastern provinces. Plows, axes, knives, tools, and now weapons as well. Not for sale, for themselves, Sarah insisted. The guard had grown to 200 men, not an army, but a serious force. Trained, disciplined, knowing every stone. 5th level, housing. The water supply was restored. Hot water in every cell. People fought over a spot on the 5th level. It was the best there. Warm, quiet, water. Dane implemented a system. Spots on the 5th level went to families with children, the elderly, the sick. The rest went higher. The 6th level. Yuna had been living here for 6 months already. The 6th level turned out to be exactly what she had expected. Science, education. The walls were covered with texts, not symbols. Texts. Yuna read them day after day. She translated them. She wrote them down. The Latora language turned out to be complex but logical, like mathematics. Every symbol had a precise meaning. Yuna compiled a dictionary, 300 words, then 500, then 1,000. The texts were varied: construction instructions, recipes for soil mixtures, descriptions of plants, diagrams of waterways, medical records, and history, their history. The Latora came from above, a long time ago, a very long time ago. They lived on the surface, they built cities, they grew crops, and then the sky caught fire, and everything was lost. Those who managed to take shelter beneath the rock survived. They built for 700 years, 7 levels, each deeper, each more complex, each more perfect. And somewhere on the 7th level they found something. Yuna couldn't read what it was. The texts on the 6th level were cut off. The last entries were hurried, the handwriting shaky, the words jumbled. Something happened. On the 7th level, something happened, and they left. They didn't perish. They left. Yuna found a word that translated roughly as exodus. Not flight, not death. Exodus. Organized. Planned. They packed their things and left. Where? Yuna didn't know. But on the wall of the 6th level she found something else. A bas-relief. A human figure. In clothing that didn't belong to this world. Dane stood before the bas-relief and couldn't breathe. A jacket. An engineer's jacket with pockets, with fasteners, with a patch on the shoulder. An object in his hands. Long, thin, with a lens on top. A theodolite, a surveying instrument. The figure stood before the entrance to the dungeon. Other figures nearby, in Latora's clothing. They stood together, like colleagues, like comrades. The bas-relief was 1,000 years old, and it depicted a man from Daniel's world. Yuna stood nearby and said something. Dane couldn't hear. Blood was pounding in his ears. He wasn't the first. Someone had been there before him, 1,000 years ago. Someone from his world, with a theodolite, with engineering knowledge, helping Latora build, or building with them. His hands were shaking. He touched the bas-relief. The stone was warm, as always. But it seemed to him that the stone recognized him. Yuna finally fell silent. She looked at him, then at the bas-relief, then at him again, and said, "You know what kind of clothing this is." Dane didn't answer. He turned away, went upstairs, didn't sleep all night, sat in the office, looked at the blueprints, at the wall with the names. 20,000 names, 20,000 lives that depend on him. From a man who shouldn't be here, or who should be here, because 1,000 years ago someone just like him had already stood in this spot. Gregor found him in the morning, brought him some porridge, set it on the table, sat down beside him, said nothing. Then he spoke. "I served your mother for 20 years. She was the quietest person in the palace. The 3rd year. Emperor Johann had 10 days left. Maybe fewer. Walter brought news. Reinhold had entered the capital. Vernon had died during the assault on the mountain fortress. His own general had slit his and surrendered the army to Reinhold in exchange for a title. Cassian retreated south. His fleet held the coast, but the land was slipping from under his feet. The empire was splitting in two, Reinhold's north, Cassian's south. The east belonged to no one. The east belonged to Dane. He stood on the surface and looked out at the wasteland. It had changed, not the stone. The stone was the same, but now the market square's awning stood upon it, stone pillars with roofs of hewn timber. A tiled road led from the square to the west, to Granholm. Caravans traveled along it every day. A second road led north, to Stonewall and beyond. Stonewall had tripled in size. Martha had become the head not of a village but of a settlement, a trading settlement at the intersection of two roads. It all began with a silver clasp and a sack of goat meat. Now Martha managed the transshipment point through which tons of iron and grain passed. Dane went downstairs. He walked past the first-level plaza. He nodded to Kira, who was carrying bread from the bakery. Kira smiled. The children had grown up. The older one was helping Bert with the transport. The younger one was learning to count from Ashley. Tomatoes grew on every farm. The promise had long been fulfilled. He walked past the office. Ashley looked up from her books. 4 assistants were nearby. Stacks of papers, bills, registers. She managed the logistics of a city of 20,000. Silently, precisely, without a single mistake. She saw him and showed him a sheet of paper, the monthly report, a surplus, a significant one. Dane nodded, silently. She nodded in response. Between them, words had long been unnecessary for practical matters. He went down further. The second level, the colonnaded hall. The waterways were working, just as they had 1,000 years ago. The third, the amphitheater farm. A sea of green on the terraces. Ella walked between the trays and checked every leaf. Nearby were 3 apprentices she had trained. Stone trees stood in a row, 20, reddish crowns. The fruits were ripening. Fourth level, the forges clanged. Owen and Conrad worked side by side. 22 blacksmiths per shift. Iron flowed like a river. Plows were shipped out in caravans. There was famine in the empire, but they had iron, an irony that saved lives. The fifth, silence. Living quarters. Hot water in the pipes. Doors. Heinrich made a door for every room. Privacy. Dignity. Little nameplates. Gareth carved them. For every family. A home. Not a cell. Home. Sixth, Yuna, surrounded by papers. With crazy, happy eyes, she looked up when he entered, said she was ready. Dane nodded. So was he. They went down to the 7th level together. Dane, Yuna, Hannah, Caleb, the 4 of them. The passage from the 6th level led through a corridor that grew narrower and narrower. The walls were closing in, the ceiling was lowering, not from a collapse, on purpose. The builders wanted whoever went down to feel the pressure. to feel that they were entering something serious. At the end of the corridor stood a door, stone, heavy, solid, a symbol on it, a crossed-out sun, large, deeply carved, text beneath it. Yuna read it aloud. Those who enter take responsibility for what they will see. Dane touched the door. Cold. For the first time ever, the stone was cold. Hana and Caleb pushed. The door shifted, slowly, with a screech that echoed through the corridor and faded into the depths. The air beyond the door was different. Not warm, not cold, neither. As if there were no temperature there. They entered. Torches illuminated the walls. Dane stopped. The hall of the 7th level was unlike any other. The walls were not stone. They were covered with dark, smooth, like glass, or obsidian, but not obsidian, something else. Beneath the surface of this covering, lines glowed faintly, not green like in the eastern cliff, blue, thin, geometric. They pulsed, slowly, like a breath. The hall was circular. A structure stood in the center, a stone pedestal, chest high. An object lay upon it. Dane approached. He looked. A book, a stone book, pages made of thin slabs of carved stone, bound with metal rings. He opened the first page. Text, dense, fine. Yuna approached. She looked. Her hands were trembling. She began to read, slowly, page by page. Dane stood nearby and listened. The book was a message, not a diary, not a history, a message. To those who would come after. Yuna translated. Her voice broke. The Littora left this book because they knew their time was running out. Not a catastrophe, not a war, the cycle. The thing that watches returns every 800 years, give or take 20. They came here 700 years ago. They built 7 levels. They grew stone trees and forged iron and raised children and recorded everything they knew. And they knew that in 100 years it would return. The light from the sky that kills everything living on the surface. They could have stayed. The stone protects. But they chose otherwise. They went deeper, much deeper, dozens of kilometers, to where the stone changes, where the warmth emanating from the Earth's core begins. They found a way down, and left, all of them, in an organized manner, taking their knowledge, seeds, and tools with them, and they closed the door behind them. This door, not so that no one would enter, but so that whoever entered would know. And the last page. Yuna fell silent before it, for a long time. Then she read it. If you're reading this, it means you've arrived. We've been waiting for you. Not specifically for you, but for someone like you. Someone who sees the stone. Someone who knows there's a world beneath the surface. We've left you the city. Use it. Protect those who come to you. And when it returns, lead them down. Deeper than we went. Deeper than seems possible. The stone will save them. The stone always saves. Dane stood and looked at the stone page. Letters he couldn't read himself. Words written 1,000 years ago. For him. Not for a prince. For an engineer. For a man who looks down when everyone else looks up. He closed the book, carefully, gently, as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever held in his hands. He turned to Yuna. She was crying silently. He turned to Hana. She stood with pickaxes in her hands, staring at the walls, at the pulsating lines, at the light in the stone. He turned to Caleb. Caleb stood by the door. His face was calm. His arms were crossed. He waited. Dane left the hall. He went upstairs, through all 7 levels, past Yuna's papers, past the hot water channels, past the clanging forges, past the terraces with greenery, past the columned hall, past the square where people were dining and laughing and talking, past Ashley, who looked up but he didn't hear, past Gregor, who was standing by the wall and nodded, past Sarah, who was standing by the door to his office, just as she stood every night. He climbed to the surface. He stood there all night. The stars. Thousands of stars above the gray wasteland. He looked at the sky, at the stars, at the moon, and thought about the light that kills, about the 800-year cycle, about the people who went deep into the earth to save themselves, and about the fact that he wasn't here by accident. Not the first, and perhaps not the last. In the morning, he convened a council, not a council of masters, a general council, in the main hall. Thousands came. The hall could not hold them all. They stood in the corridors, on the steps, in the aisles. Dane stood on the dais. He looked at the faces. 3 years of faces. Gregor, Hana, Ashley, Sarah, Kira, Owen, Gareth, Bert, Darren, Conrad, Caleb, Thomas, Eric, Philip, Ella, Heinrich, Walter, Martha, Yuna, Mira, Horst, and thousands of others. Every name on the wall, every name in his head. He spoke softly. The hall listened. He told them about Litor, about the city that had been here before them, about the people who went underground not because of war, but because of the sky, about the book on the 7th level, about the message, and about how they left this city to him. Not to him, Dane, to all of them. To everyone standing in this hall, to everyone who broke stone and carried water and lit torches, to everyone who came here broken and found a place. Silence. He continued. The war above is ending. Reinhold has taken the capital. Cassian holds the south. Soon one of them will win, or both will grow weary, and then they will look to the east, to the wasteland, to the city that does not exist on the surface. And they will come, not with an army, with a question. How did you survive? How did you feed 20,000 people where no grass grows? And the answer to that question will be our defense. Not walls, not a labyrinth, not guards. The answer. Because whoever knows how to feed people is needed by everyone, and whoever is needed by everyone can set the terms. He fell silent. Then he said one last thing. He doesn't want an empire. He doesn't want a throne. He doesn't want power over those who live above. He wants one thing, for this city to stand, for the doors to be open to everyone who comes, for the porridge to be hot, for everyone's name to be on the wall, and so that when the time comes, they'll be ready to go deeper, much deeper, to where the stone saves. Because the stone always saves. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Gareth struck the stone with his palm. Once. A dull sound echoed through the hall. Then Bert struck. Then Horst. Then Conrad. Then everyone. Palms on the stone. A rhythm. The same rhythm as a year ago at the first council. The blow of a pickaxe on rock. A rhythm they all knew. A rhythm that was their pulse. Dane stood and listened. 20,000 palms on the stone. The sound faded into the depths, through all 7 levels, through the stone, through time, to where, 1,000 years ago, other people stood in this same hall and listened to this same rhythm. He didn't cry. Engineers don't cry, they build. In the evening, he sat in the office, alone, quiet. Ashley brought tea, set it down, didn't leave, stood there. He looked up, she was looking at him. Then she said quietly that might wait until morning. Dane smiled. Yes, maybe. She sat down next to him. Silently. The two of them sat in silence, drinking bitter herbal tea, and that was enough. Behind the wall, Gregor walked by. He stopped, listened, smiled, and walked on. His footsteps faded into the hallway. Somewhere below, Hannah was checking the stability of the new passageway. She tapped on the stone, she listened, she nodded. On the 3rd level, Ella was picking stone fruits from a tree that was a year old. Reddish, warm, sweet. On the 4th, Owen was striking red-hot iron with a hammer. Sparks flew. On the 5th, children slept behind wooden doors with nameplates. Quiet, warm, safe. On the 6th, Una was working among the papers and translating the last pages. On the 7th, behind a stone door with a crossed-out sun, blue lines pulsed in the darkness. Slowly, steadily, like a breath, like a heart, like a city. Dane finished his tea. He set the mug on the table. He stood up. He walked over to the wall of names. 20,000 names. He ran his finger over the first. Gregor. Over the second. Caleb. Over the third. Bert. Over the fourth. Owen. Every name, every life, every stone they had laid together. He stepped back. He took a piece of charcoal, and at the very bottom of the wall, where there was still space left, he wrote the last name. Daniel Hune. Small, inconspicuous, among thousands of others. One name. An engineer from Seoul who died on the bridge and woke up in a carriage. Who saw a stone and saw a home in it. Who built a city for 20,000 people he didn't know. And who finally, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, was in the right place. He set the charcoal aside. He extinguished the torch. In the darkness, it was quiet and warm. The stone breathed. The city slept. Somewhere on the surface, stars shone over the gray wasteland, which had long since ceased to be gray, and had long since ceased to be empty.